Chapter 1049. Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world and change the trend of the world. Therefore Yi Hongyu must be one of the people he talked to. This was something that many people did not say out loud. Because the current great divine priest of judgment had known Ning Ke when she was still the Tao addict. The two of them used to be sworn enemies, but in the end they did not live and die together. The two of them had fought side by side. She had lived by the Yanming Lake in Chang'an for a long time, and they had also bathed in blood in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and they had died together. In the eyes of the Divine Hall, even if the great divine priest of judgment were to marry Ning Ke, it would not be surprising. As for how shocking it would be, it was not within the scope of the two people's considerations. After all, they were people who shocked the world and did things that shocked the world. What made Haotian Taoism even more uneasy was that the new stream that the Divine Hall swore to destroy was founded by Yi Su, and she was his sister. Therefore Yi Hongyu was the most natural ally of the academy and the best target to incite, no matter from the perspective of intimacy or other aspects. Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall looked at Qinshi, who was standing at the forefront, and guessed what this Tang would say, or rather what Ning Ke would say. Their expressions were very complicated. There were a lot of uneasiness, shock, confusion, and worry. Did the academy really want to incite the great divine priest of judgment? Did what Ning Ke was going to say really have something to do with this? However, at this moment, thousands of powerful Haotian Taoism cultivators were gathered in the hall. How could he say those rebellious words? How could the great divine priest of judgment respond? Thinking of this, people felt a little relieved. As the person involved, Yi Hongyu's expression did not change at all. Her beautiful eyebrows and eyes were as cold as snow. She did not even open her eyes. "What does that guy want to say?" she asked with her eyes closed, looking very casual. It was obviously a very important matter, faintly revealing an extremely terrifying feeling, but when her red lips slightly opened, it became a small matter, a small greeting. People in the hall looked at Qinshi again and wanted to know what he was going to say. Being stared at by thousands of indifferent eyes, Qinshi was very nervous. It was not only because of the thousands of eyes, but also because what he was going to say next might become his epitaph. Ning Ke said. At this point, Qinshi paused and Chu Yuxian almost fainted. Qin Seven took a deep breath and looked at Yi Hongyu. He said the second half of the sentence in a low voice. "He's waiting for you in Chang'an." "Why would I wait for you in Chang'an?" Although he could marry her, he naturally wouldn't wait for her to marry him. Instead, he would wait for her to surrender or return. The solemn and sacred Taoist temple was already extremely quiet, but now it became even more silent. Only that sentence was still floating in the golden light, drifting into everyone's ears. Was he trying to persuade the great divine priest of judgment to betray the Tao sect? Did Ning Ke really dare to think like that? Did the Tangs really dare to say that in the divine hall? Were they all crazy? Countless pairs of eyes fell on Qinshi. Their eyes were filled with shock and confusion. After saying this, Qinshi felt a little pain in his throat, as if he had lost all the water in an instant. However, all the fear from before had disappeared along with the water. If he says it's a broken pot, then it's broken. Hesitation doesn't suit your personality. He asked you why you didn't betray him? When are you planning to betray us? He said that no matter when you betray him, he will always be waiting for you in Chang'an. At this moment, the divine priests and deacons, who were still in a trance and thought that they had misheard, finally completely understood Ning Ke's intention. In the most sacred Taoist temple at the top of Peach Mountain, in front of thousands of the most devout followers of Haotian, Ning Ke actually persuaded the great divine priest of judgment to betray him. Was this instigation? Was there such a ridiculous and almost childish instigation in the world? Or was this the Academy's provocation? But who would believe it? No. How could the Academy do such a ridiculous thing? The divine priests and deacons, who had an absurd expression on their faces, suddenly thought of a terrifying inference. Ning Ke wanted to say these words in front of thousands of people. As long as the world could hear it, he would have achieved his goal. This was not a conspiracy, nor was it an overt plot. It was not a plot at all. It was a sharp iron knife pointing at the most fundamental contradiction of the Divine Hall. The Divine Hall could not solve the problem of the new stream, so they could not convince themselves to continue to trust Yi Hongyu and the Divine Hall of Judgment led by her. What Ning Ke did was to peel off the surface, but he did it so cruelly that everyone in the hall felt a burst of pain. Pain brought anger. The sea of people in the Divine Hall rippled. The divine priests and deacons angrily approached Qinshi and Chu Yuxian like a black tide. When the psyche of thousands of divine priests and deacons gathered together, It was unimaginably horrible. Qinchi spat out blood and his face turned pale. At this moment Yi Hongyu finally opened her eyes. Just as Qinchi was about to collapse, her cold gaze made him feel a little more relaxed, and he breathed in some fresh air. A destructive aura rose from the depths of the divine hall like a hurricane on the ocean. It came to Chu Yuxian and Qinchi and hit them in the face. At this moment Yi Hongyu stood up and stood in the middle of the aura. The atmosphere in the divine hall was stifled, becoming abnormally tense. Hundreds of deacons of the judicial department in black emerged from the sea of people and stood in front of their angry colleagues like black bubbles. A thunderous voice resounded in the hall, "Apostate shall die." It was the voice of the hierarch lord, calm and full of unstoppable divine power. Yi Hongyu said calmly, "Since you have started, why don't you finish it? It's always the most painful thing to hear a story halfway. What's the harm in listening to it?" Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall looked at each other and did not know what to do. Would Taoism really split today just because of what Ning Ke said from thousands of miles away? The hierarch lord said slowly, "It's a blasphemy to hear such words. I just want to hear what else Ning Ke has to say. As for blasphemy, I will kill them after I hear it. Then there will be no blasphemy." Yi Hongyu said calmly as an explanation. The hierarch lord's silence was a kind of acceptance. Yi Hongyu looked at Qinchi and said calmly, "Go on." Qinchi felt a little strange when he thought of what Ning Ke said. But he did not dare to hide anything at this moment, so he repeated it honestly. He said, "It's good to be accompanied by youth." He said, "It makes me crazy to read all the poems and books." He said, "I want to see you so much that I'm going crazy. Have a good weekend. I love this chapter." Mountie 11:18. Chapter 1050. My good friend Hoodlum finally came to our Jianghu. His Legend of the Ranger of the Three Kingdoms was also a classic of the Three Kingdoms. The plot and characters were very unique. How could it be wrong to write the heroine as a woman? I believe many of my old comrades still remember it. I sincerely recommend my brothers and sisters to have a taste of it. The title of his new book is The Battle of the Three Kingdoms. The book number is 3032615. He said that you have to break the jar. It's not your character to hesitate. He asked you why you didn't betray him? When are you going to betray him? He said that no matter when you betray him, he will always be waiting for you in Chang'an. He said, "It's good to be accompanied by youth." He said, "It's good to read all the poems." He said, "I want to see you so much that I'm going crazy." It was quiet in the Taoist temple as if it was the deep winter. Yes, it was the deep winter outside the temple. But how could the winter enter the temple? Only Qin Vi's voice was floating around. The first 3 sentences were still floating in the air, but the last 3 sentences came again. It was like the waves behind pushing the waves in front, tearing the quiet space apart and hitting the stone wall full of religious murals. The murals smashed into pieces, but thousands of divine priests and deacons in the temple were covered with snow and froth. Ning Ke's words were as stiff as iron and frivolous. It was a matter of course for them to be together. It was the Academy's matter of course. I am waiting for you in Chang'an and you will come. This was the only logical result, and it was bound to happen. Taoism worshipped Haotian, and the new stream was seriously shaking the foundation of Haotian. No matter what Yi Hongyu did, she could not solve the fundamental conflict between them. Therefore the new stream must be destroyed and Yi Su must die. Since Yi Su would die, she would betray him. She would betray Taoism sooner or later. It was better to betray sooner than later, because the betrayal earlier could give Yi Su and the new stream a chance of survival. In fact, many people knew this, including Yi Hongyu herself. However, no one in Taoism thought about it, as if the crack on the sun did not exist if they did not look at it. At this moment, Ning Ke said a few rude words. Qin 7 and Chu Yuxian perfectly understood his intention and used a more rude way to make his words resound in the divine halls of West Hill at the cost of their lives. These words were like a rude man tearing off the clothes of a weak woman. He tore off the sacred blood-colored robe covering her body of faith, and exposed the naked truth to the hot divine light of Haotian. He had pointed out the main point of the question and even answered it. Therefore, even if the thousands of people in the divine hall wanted to pretend that they didn't see it, they couldn't do it. These words of Taoism would master. Taoism of Taoism, Feng Taoism, Shi and Feng school. The hierarch stood behind the curtain of light. His tall figure did not tremble at all, but the curtain of light suddenly trembled and rippled with circles of light. Looking at the shaking curtain of light, Chu Yuxian's mind was also shaken. He and Qin 7 made the decision, so they were no longer afraid of death, but it did not feel good to know that they were doomed. Everyone looked at Yi Hongyu, waiting for her to make a decision. They were waiting for the first time in the history of the divine halls of West Hill to betray the great divine priest of judgment, and for the rupture of Taoism. People had mixed feelings. Some were relieved, some were anxious and scared, and some were curious. Obviously the crowd was in an uproar, but there was no noise. She was the center of attention, but it seemed that she could not feel those eyes. She was still standing there quietly. What was Yi Hongyu thinking at this time? Was it good to have a young companion? She thought of many years ago, outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in the depths of the wilderness. She thought of the iron chain that passed through the clouds and connected the land of death with the reality. She thought of the basket under the iron chain, and the young people inside and outside the basket. She squinted and looked at the distant sky outside the hall. Under the sky was the kingdom of song. Tang Xiaotang should be there, right beside her brother. Long Qing had disappeared for so many days, so he should be there too. She was in charge of the divine hall of judgment. Although she could not control Long Qing, Hengmu, and the others, she could find their whereabouts. However, the distance between the two places was too far. It would be too late for her to rescue them. Who was in the basket under the iron chain when it passed through the clouds and mist? Besides Ningke, there was Mo Shanshan. Where was the former calligraphy addict and now the queen of the Great River Kingdom? Yi Hongyu smiled. She seemed to have thought of something, but it was meaningful. The young people in the past had all become great people. She was the youngest great divine priest of judgment in the history of the divine halls of West Hill. Ningke had become the spokesperson of the academy and the Tang Empire. And now he was attacking her. Yes, she was very clear that the 6 sentences that seemed to be floating in the hall were the dark iron cutlass in Ningke's hand. The first 3 sentences and the last 3 sentences were all shocking. I always thought that Ningke was the shame of the academy. Yi Hongyu finally spoke, breaking the oppressive and painful silence in the divine hall. Obviously, what she said was beyond everyone's expectation. That's because he's too narrow-minded. He likes to target specific people and specific things with his methods. Of course, his methods are indeed good. If it were someone else who was pushed into this position by him, they would probably just take advantage of the situation and rebel. The hall was extremely quiet. She stopped smiling and said coldly, "But I am not someone else. I am Yi Hongyu." Does he expect to break my heart with these words? I hate those stupid literati the most. I feel disgusted by these words. How can I listen to them? If Qingshan doesn't come to me, I will come to Qingshan? No, I have never been such a person. If he doesn't come to me, why should I come to him? Tell him to give up. She looked at Qin Shi and said expressionlessly, should he just kill him or save him? Qin Shi did not understand. He did not understand why he would fail. Yi Hongyu looked so beautiful and calm, as if she did not hear Ningke's words and did not care about Yisu's life or death in the kingdom of song. What? Qin Shi stared at her perfect face seriously. His face gradually turned pale and his eyes seemed to be burning with wildfire. He turned all his soul into courage. He did not admit defeat because Ningke had another sentence. Before they left Chang, and Ningke had seriously reminded them not to tell him that unless they were in a desperate situation or at the last moment, they should never tell him that. Qin Shi did not know the meaning of that sentence. But from Ningke's attitude, he knew that it must be the key to victory. So why should he not use it? Ningke said one last sentence. Qin Shi stared at Yi Hongyu's eyes and said. Yi Hongyu looked indifferent. That person is Xiong Chumo. Qin Shi's voice was a little hoarse. It was not because of dehydration but because he was nervous. He used too much force and his throat began to bleed. The sentence was without a head or tail. Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall could not understand what it meant. That person was Xiong Chumo? Who was she? Who was Xiong Chumo? Qin Shi did not understand it, so did the others. In the divine hall, among the crowd, only 2 people understood the meaning of this sentence. Because they were the 2 people involved in that incident. The light curtain stopped shaking and the hierarch's figure gradually became deep. Yi Hongyu stood in front of the light curtain and her expression gradually became serious. Chapter 1051. That person was Xiong Chumo. Who was that person? Who was Xiong Chumo? At this time, thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall were thinking about the same question. They had no answer, but they knew that since it was Ningke's last sentence, it must be very important. So they looked at Yi Hongyu with more and more solemn eyes, just like her expression. Only a few people had heard of the name Xiong Chumo. Only a few people knew that it was the hierarch's secular name, which made them even more nervous. The waterfall-like curtain of light in front of the high platform stopped flowing. It was as solemn as a silent wall. The tall figure behind the wall became more and more imposing. A strong aura spread out in all directions. There was no killing intent, only a divine majesty. This was because the situation had reached the most critical moment. The tall figure had to crush all doubts and pressure from her. Yi Hongyu stood in front of the light curtain. Compared to the light curtain and the figure behind it, she seemed very small, but she stood steadily, as if she would not be swallowed no matter what happened behind her. Time passed slowly but unquestionably, just like the wind blowing from the cliffs outside the hall. Although it was gentle, it was bitterly cold and unquestionably lowered the temperature. The next moment would be the battle between the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment. Once again, out of everyone's expectation, Yi Hongyu's expression gradually became calm. She was no longer gloomy or solemn, but just as a clear stream under a plum tree. Without any expression, she slowly sat back in the chair. That blood-red divine robe of judgment floated up with her movements and then fell down. Like a red flower, it retracted back to the branch and no longer made a sound. It seemed that nothing had happened. It seemed that she did not hear a word. She just sat in the chair quietly. Only the closest subordinates of the divine hall of judgment and those red-robed divine priests with high states could see the impatience and tiredness in her eyes. She raised her right arm and pointed at Qinshi and Chu Yuxian from afar. Her slender fingers seemed to be dripping dew, but she did not conceal her indifference at all. The black deacons of the divine hall of judgment stepped forward without hesitation, knocked Qinshi and Chu Yuxian down, locked them up with inhibition, and dragged them out of the hall. Qinshi and Chu Yuxian would be taken to the Yu prison, where they might never see the light of day again, but at least they would not die immediately. Naturally, many people in the hall had different opinions about this decision, but at this moment, no one dared to question her decision. Even the tall figure behind the light curtain remained silent. Then she took a look. With just a glance, the thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall all felt that the divine priest of judgment was looking at them. They were all shocked by the coldness and power in that gaze. The sea of red, black, and brown divine robes could be calm or berserk, but before her eyes, they all scattered in all directions, flowing towards the low-lying areas. Not even the sound of footsteps could be heard. In a very short period of time, thousands of priests and deacons quietly withdrew from the hall, leaving the world to the two of them. Yi Hongyu and the hierarch lord behind the light screen. I'm curious, how did the academy find out? Yi Hongyu sat on the chair and said expressionlessly. She did not turn around to look at the screen of light. Behind the light screen, the hierarch lord squinted and looked at her back. No one knew what he was thinking. Yi Hongyu did not wait for his answer and said coldly, there is only one possibility that the academy knows about this, and that is Yu Lian. Yu Lian was the third sister of the academy, and also the current grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. If Ning Ke and Long Qing were considered lifelong enemies by the cultivation world, then decades ago Yu Lian and Xiong Chumo were the real lifelong enemies. The one who knew you best was not your friend but your enemy. Xiong Chumo finally said, since you heard that sentence you never doubted it. What? Yi Hongyu sat on the chair and looked at the winter sky outside the hall expressionlessly. She said, I always knew it was you, but I didn't expect others to know it too. After a long silence, Xiong Chumo asked, when did you know? Yi Hongyu rubbed her eyebrows tiredly and said, during the right to light, your sedan was shot by Ning Quebec. I knew it was you the moment I saw you. Xiong Chumo smiled weirdly and said, I didn't expect you to be so patient. Yi Hongyu said, you've been in pain ever since you were defeated by Yu Lian. Even if Hao Ying cured you, he couldn't cure your Taoist heart. Since you're going to die in my hands, why not let you suffer for a few more years? Why should I be in a hurry? Looking at her back in silence, Xiong Chumo suddenly realized that it was hard for him to look at her back like he did in the past years, reminiscing her figure many years ago. She was very powerful now, so powerful that she could threaten him. How can you be sure it was Yu Lian? No one should know about it. It's not because she's your enemy. In her eyes, you're not qualified to be her opponent. It's because she's the 23-year cicada cultivation and the grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. The Devil's Doctrine has always been the best at scheming. I won't be surprised no matter how much she knows. Just because of this, you're sure she knows? And because she didn't kill you even though she injured you badly in the back of the mountain of the academy. Yi Hongyu stood up slowly and said, I couldn't figure out why she let you go. Ning Ke couldn't figure it out either. Now the answer finally appears. She still didn't turn around and looked at the winter sky outside the hall. Because she knew I would kill you. So she kept you alive to give me a reason to betray the sect. She used you, a good-for-nothing, to split Taoism, she said calmly, it's indeed the 23-year cicada cultivation? Xiong Chumo said after a long silence. And then? There was no then. There was no terrifying divine light spreading, no shrill Taoist swords dancing, no war, no revenge, no humiliation, and not even a trace of hatred. Yi Hongyu walked out of the hall. Her bloody gown of judgment swayed in the cold wind like flowers blooming on the branches, overshadowing all the divine lights on the wall. Behind the light curtain, Xiong Chumo's eyes narrowed into two lines. One of his eyes was stained with blood as if it would never recover. It looked filthy and evil. Gradually, a dim light accumulated in the deepest part of his eyes. It was shock, anger, and fear. He didn't realize until today that he could escape from Yu Lian's hands because it was a trap set up by Yu Lian, not because he was strong enough. In Yi Hongyu's words, in Yu Lian's eyes, he was never qualified to be her opponent. His life or death was not important to her. She let him live because she knew from the beginning that he would become the cause of chaos, or rather, the sinner of Haotian Taoism. But Yu Lian didn't expect that Yi Hongyu didn't do anything. Xiong Chumo also couldn't understand why she didn't do anything after the right to light a few years ago. Chapter 1052. After leaving the White Divine Hall on the peak, Yi Hongyu walked down the mountain path. Clouds gathered around her skirt, and her mind became clear. When she arrived at the cliff plateau, she was as calm as still water. Looking at the small stone houses deep in the cliff plateau, her eyes were as calm as water. The next moment, her Taoist heart became as hard as iron. The cliff plateau and the small stone houses were very meaningful to her. They were not just mementos. When she was at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, she forcefully lowered her state to escape from Lotus. Her Taoist heart and cultivation were greatly damaged. When she returned to the Peach Mountain, many people thought that she would never be able to recover. She was despised, and the hierarch even wanted her to marry Luo Kadi. She locked herself in the small stone house and continued her cultivation in silence. She knew that she could overcome all the obstacles. Then she received a letter from the Sword Garret. She became powerful again. She killed the previous Great Divine Priest of Judgment and became the youngest Great Divine Priest in the history of the West Hill Divine Palace. She began to write her own legend. After that day, Luo Kadi was no longer a problem. Even the hierarch was no longer a problem. There was no problem in the human world that could baffle her. Including what Ning Ke said today and the question given by the Academy, it was still not a problem for her. She came to the stone house not to ask the person in the house to relieve her confusion and pain, but to receive the reward she deserved for answering the question. She did not betray Haotian Taoism, nor did she attack the hierarch. She did not lead the Divine Hall of Judgment to tear Haotian Taoism apart. She ignored Ning Ke's invitation and did not take a step closer to the Academy. She still stayed on the Peach Mountain and put herself in danger. Now she was alone and she was taking a strange risk. She had the right to ask the person inside the stone house for anything she wanted. Dusk fell on the Peach Mountain and dyed her divine robe of judgment redder. It was as if it had been soaked in blood for thousands of years before it was put on again. She stood quietly in front of the stone house and did not look inside. Because the person who should have been inside the house was sitting in a wheelchair at the edge of the cliff and watching the sunset. Although I don't know exactly what it is, I think it must be very important since Ning Ke chose to put it at the end. The old man in the wheelchair said calmly without turning back. Yi Hongyu said, "It's important to me but not to the human world. In other words, it's important to the past but not to the present." The Abbey Dean said, "After all, it is still important." Yi Hongyu said, "But I don't want to hear it. Ning Ke's attitude towards you is not proper enough." The Abbey Dean smiled and said, "They sent 2 people to say 7 sentences, and now they want you to risk your life for the Academy. This is too disrespectful. After all, the 7 sentences are not the 7 tomes of arcane." Yi Hongyu said, "Indeed, this is also the reason why I don't want to listen to him." The Abbey Dean said, "It's also because you already knew the truth. That's why it's not shocking enough. That's why it's hard for you to break the defense in your heart and make a decisive move." Yi Hongyu said, "Ning Ke and Yu Lian still underestimated me. The Devil's Doctrine and the Academy might be able to predict everything in the world, but they can't predict what I'm thinking." The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair and said with a smile, "I have said something similar before. I always knew it was Xiong Chumo." Yi Hongyu said, "I didn't do anything after the right to light, not because I wanted to see him struggling, but because I knew you wouldn't allow it." The Abbey Dean said, "I'm the master of Haotian Taoism. I won't be biased." Yi Hongyu said, "I still won't do anything. I can even never do anything." The Abbey Dean looked at her gently and said, "Because of your faith?" Because of your devotion to Haoyin? Yi Hongyu said, it has nothing to do with faith. The Abbey Dean smiled and asked, then what is it? Yi Hongyu said, I want to exchange Xiong Chumo's life for another. The Abbey Dean laughed and shook his head. First, you have to prove that you can take Xiong Chumo's life. Only then can you exchange it for another's. Only what belonged to you could be exchanged for something else. Otherwise it would be stealing or robbing. Xiong Chumo was the hierarch of the Divine Hall. He had reached the 5 states long ago and suppressed all evils with the divine light of Tianqi. Other than the eldest brother and Yu Lian who could say that they could win. No matter how talented Yi Hongyu was, she was still too young. Even if she had reached the peak of knowing destiny state, how could she take Xiong Chumo's life? Then I will exchange my life for his. She said, no matter how shameless Ning Ke is in this, I am still grateful to him and the 23-year cicada cultivation. What? Because the Academy has proven my importance to the Divine Hall. They have tried their best to get my help. Haoyin Taoism should also pay a high price to persuade me not to leave. The Abbey Dean smiled and did not say anything. The hierarch's life was indeed not in Yi Hongyu's hands. But she was the great divine priest of judgment and had countless loyal subordinates. If she betrayed Haoyin Taoism, it would be a heavy blow to the divine halls of West Hill when the divine hall of light was deserted and the divine hall of revelation was without a leader. The Academy had done everything they could for this. Yu Lian had been waiting in silence for years, hoping to see this scene. But she did not let it happen. The Abbey Dean looked at the red clouds in the sky and said slowly, he is my most outstanding disciple. Yi Hongyu said, when he was young, people in the Abbey all thought that he was not as good as Chen Pipi. The Abbey Dean shook his head and said, not to mention others, even I used to think so. But he proved that I was wrong. Everyone was wrong. Yi Hongyu said, so you think I am not qualified to exchange for his life? The doctrine of the new stream seems to be no different from that of Haoyin. But in fact, it is to take back the power from Haoyin Taoism to the believers, and to take back the glory from the divine kingdom of Haoyin to the secular world. The devil's doctrine only affects the cultivation world, but the new stream affects the entire human world. He has gone further than the divine priest of light 1,000 years ago. The Abbey Dean said calmly, in this sense he is the biggest traitor of Taoism. He is the real gravedigger. Every time I think about this, even I, as his teacher, can't help but be moved. I even feel proud of him. Such a person can't be easily exchanged. Yi Hongyu looked at the sunset. It was the east and there was the sea. The kingdom of Song was by the sea. You still insist on killing him? Ning Ke asked me to think about the future of Haoyin Taoism. But he did not know that I have been thinking about it. The doctrine of the new stream has been established. It will spread far and wide and there will be many believers. Killing him will not change the situation. Why should I kill him? Why should I kill him and then force you to leave? The Abbey Dean turned around and said to her with a smile. Yi Hongyu did not know what Ning Ke had said to the Abbey Dean. As I said before, you did not leave because of your faith. He looked at Yi Hongyu and said lovingly, that faith is not about Haoyin but about Yi Su. Even though he is a wastrel like me, he is much more important to you than Haoyin. As long as he has a chance to live, you will not take the risk. I said that Ning Ke could not see himself clearly, so what he said to me was in vain. Obviously he did not see you clearly, so what he said to you was also in vain. Yi Hongyu did not say anything. She admitted that this old man, who was not her teacher but was better than her teacher, had accurately grasped her mentality. Her brother's life was like a pool full of thunder and lightning. And it was his sword that once dazzled the continent. She could not move forward. As long as he could live, she could forget all the humiliations and things she wanted to forget. She could face them calmly. If the Academy could not guarantee his life, then it would be meaningless to do anything else. Moreover, she knew clearly that Ning Ke was a selfish, cold-blooded and shameless person. He had proved it before and today he would prove it again. The dusk faded and the snow clouds drifted away. The sky was full of stars, and among the stars, a bright moon shone on the human world, including the plateau of Peach Mountain. The Abbey Dean looked up at the bright moon and kept silent for a long time. Then he said something. His voice was as light as the moonlight on his body. It was as clear as water, without any emotion. I will give you Xiong Chumo's life. Yi Hongyu bowed to the Abbey Dean. After getting the promise she wanted, she left the plateau. Although the Abbey Dean did not promise anything except Xiong Chumo's death, she knew that her brother's life was saved. Long Qing and the drunkard who went to the Song Kingdom would not do anything. Because the Abbey Dean had made it clear that killing Yi Su now would not do any good for Taoism. The question was, did the Academy not realize this? Was what Ning Ke had done in vain and would only be described as a joke in the history books? The Abbey Dean waved his hand in the cold night wind, as if he was trying to catch some moonlight. What is the thing between the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment? Asked the middle-aged priest. The Abbey Dean shook his head and said, I don't know and I don't need to know. The middle-aged priest was a bit worried and said, the Academy is so concerned about this matter. The Abbey Dean said calmly, the Academy has always claimed that they only do meaningful things and do not care about the meaning. But in fact, they never do meaningless things. What they said to me and what they said to Yi Hongyu were all part of a scheme. Ning Ke knew how destructive the new stream was to Taoism and used it to convince me. I have to admit that he was right even though he did not see everything. If he could convince me, Taoism would lose or end. If he couldn't, Yi Su would die and Yi Hongyu would betray Taoism. Taoism would also lose. The middle-aged priest seemed to have realized something. He looked at the back of the Abbey Dean and praised from the bottom of his heart, if he did nothing, the Academy would not be able to do anything. It seemed to be the Abbey Dean's response. It was a perfect response to the changes by remaining unchanged. However, the Abbey Dean shook his head and looked at the bright moon again. He did not say anything. Yi Hongyu walked into the divine hall of judgment and stood under the black stone pillar. She looked at the snow-covered mountains with her hands behind her back and kept silent for a long time. Her eyebrows were gradually covered by a layer of frost in the night wind. No one knew what she was thinking about. Her loyal subordinates and the girls who served her stayed in the side hall with complicated expressions. They did not dare to disturb her. The moon moved and the stars did not move. The night grew darker and darker. She looked at the direction of the kingdom of Song. She seemed to be able to see the killing, the burning holy fire, and the people biting each other like beasts for their faith. There was no expression on her beautiful face, as if it was carved out of ice. At this moment, light footsteps were heard in the quiet divine hall of judgment. Logically speaking, even the slightest footstep would have alerted the black deacons in the side hall. However, what was strange was that this person walked all the way behind her and did not encounter any obstruction. Maybe it was because even the most ruthless black deacons did not dare to stop him, or maybe even the powerhouses of the judicial department could not hear his footsteps. It was a wretched-looking short old Taoist with limbs as thin as withered branches. Xiong Chumo, the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, came behind her silently in the deep night. Yi Hongyu looked at the direction of the kingdom of Song. She saw the snowy clouds glowing in the night sky, as if she could see the terrible storm brewing on the sea. Her face was slightly pale. She squinted her eyes, which turned into a thin line and a sword. Chapter 1053. Yi Hongyu turned around and left the moonlight and starlight behind her. The paleness on her face became lighter because of the shadow. She looked at the hierarch quietly and said nothing, but her mind was full of thoughts. Xiong Chumo also looked at her quietly. He looked at the lines outlined by the moonlight and the beautiful face in the shadow. He was sure that she was no longer the little girl he used to be. Therefore he was inexplicably angry. Yi Hongyu was not surprised, angry, sarcastic, or hateful. She did not show any expression. It seemed that she was not surprised by his appearance. Because of her calmness, Xiong Chumo became even angrier. The ugliest and evilest act in those years was exposed, which made him very uneasy. Her calmness confused him and hurt his dignity. He would rather see a crazy and horrible great divine priest of judgment than not see him in her eyes. What did you say to the Abbey Dean? He asked. Yi Hongyu looked at him and did not answer. Xiong Chumo was silent for a moment and suddenly laughed. There was a trace of perverted pleasure on his ugly and wretched face. He said, "So you are afraid of me?" Yi Hongyu still did not say anything. "Yes, you are afraid of me." Xiong Chumo's eyes flickered like a wolf's and a little weird. His voice was also trembling because of excitement. "What happened in those years left a deep impression on you. When you found out it was me, you did not dare to take revenge because you were afraid of going through that experience again." Yi Hongyu looked at him and asked calmly, "Why should I be afraid?" Xiong Chumo's expression changed slightly. He did not understand why she would ask such a question. Wasn't it obvious? Even if you are not afraid now, how could the poor and weak little girl who had legs like reeds not be afraid of that shadow? His breath became heavy as if he was panting after a serious illness. His eyes were stained with a layer of bloody red and his voice was trembling. After you found out the truth, besides anger, you would also have many questions. Why did I, as the sect leader, take the risk of being discovered by Yi Su to do that? In fact, even I don't have a clear answer. When I think about it later, maybe I was jealous. He looked at the moonlight beside her hair and her beautiful face and was a little lost. Yi Hongyu said calmly, I'm not interested in these things. Not interested? Xiong Chumo was stunned and said in disbelief, You're not interested in these? When the Abbey Dean traveled far away to the South Sea, Yisu returned from the wilderness and entered the human realm to cultivate and meditate on life and death. Then, this happened. Don't you want to know why this happened? Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, You are playing childish tricks when my brother is not here. Do I need to know what you are thinking? Xiong Chumo's eyes were wide open. His skinny body suddenly emitted a horrifying sense of destruction. He opened his arms and said in disbelief, A child's play? His voice became somewhat sharp and unpleasant, like a woman's fingernails rapidly scraping against a plaster wall. It was full of anger and disbelief. Child's play? He repeated in a shrill voice, You think it's just a child's play? How pitiful you cried then. No matter how much you called out to Yisu, no one responded. Have you been in pain all these years? I don't understand how you can place so much hope on that useless man after being humiliated so much. Yisu can't save you. Stars were changing in the deepest part of Yi Hongyu's lake-like eyes. Many images kept changing in front of her eyes and then gradually disappeared, turning into indifference. How could she forget that? If she could forget that her body was seen by Qin Pipi in the Taoist temple, why would she want to kill her? If she could forget, why did she never care about letting others see her beautiful body? Wasn't it because she subconsciously felt that this body was dirty? Fine, then she couldn't forget it. But so what? She looked at Xiong Chumo and said sarcastically, I'm not like those crazy professors in the Revelation Institute. I'm not interested in your psychological state. Maybe you are jealous of him, or you are out of your mind, or you want to lick the Abbey Dean's feet. I don't care about those things. Xiong Chumo stared at her beautiful face and said word by word, That's not a child's play. Yi Hongyu stared at his ugly face and said word by word, But you are just a child. Xiong Chumo was extremely short and skinny, far shorter than an ordinary person. He had been hiding behind the light curtain all these years and made himself look tall and big. It was because of this mental illness. Back then he took a great risk to bully Yi Hongyu, who was still a little girl. Maybe it was because of this mental illness. Yi Hongyu said indifferently, I know what you want to see. You want to see me sad, angry and desperate. You want to see me feel ashamed because I'm not clean anymore. But unfortunately you won't see it. Because I don't want to play these childish games with you. Another child's trick. Xiong Chumo's face turned extremely ugly. The dim light in his eyes became crazier and his aura became more terrifying. He said coldly, I'm not a child. You're even shorter than a 10-year-old. Yi Hongyu was much taller than him and looked down at him. Then her eyes gradually moved down and fell between his legs. Decades ago your penis was destroyed by Yu Lian. Even if you want to do anything to me you can't. Why should I feel ashamed? She said, In terms of height you are a child. In terms of mind you are a child. In terms of sexual ability, you will always be a child. Anger and extreme anger occupied Xiong Chumo's body and mind. But strangely he gradually calmed down. He squinted his eyes and kept silent for a long time. So you take it as being bitten by a mad dog. But don't forget, even if you are bitten by a dog, it will leave a scar. Yi Hongyu said calmly, Even a mad dog has teeth. Since your penis is destroyed you are like a toothless dog. What will be left after being bitten? She had been calm all the time. There was no mocking, deliberate pity or inadvertent anger. But this was the biggest mockery and contempt. Because these were all facts. Even if Xiong Chumo was the powerful hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, the most powerful person in Haoyan enlightenment, and the murderer who had humiliated her. In her calm eyes, he was just a child whose penis was destroyed and could not grow taller. He was an unlucky child whose surname was Xiong. I will kill you. Xiong Chumo suddenly said in a serious and heavy tone, I don't know what you said to the Abbey Dean. Even though you look calm now, I know you want me to die. You want me to die more than anyone else in the world. So I have to kill you. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, You came to the divine hall of judgment and said these words to provoke me to attack you first. Are you disappointed that I didn't give you a chance? For Haoyan Taoism, the hierarch lord was more important than the great divine priest of judgment. But it did not mean that he could do whatever he wanted. The headmaster ascended to heaven and Qin Mao returned to the land. From that moment on, Xiong Chumo was no longer the most powerful person in Haoyan Taoism. He became a dog again. To beat a dog, one had to look at its master. If a dog wanted to bite, one had to look at its master. You don't dare to attack me. Yi Hongyu said calmly, because you can't bear the responsibility of the division of Haotian Taoism. You can only watch as I become stronger and stronger. You can only wait for the day I become strong enough to kill you, but you can't do anything about it. You can only fall into the abyss of despair without knowing where the bottom is. You will suffer endless torment and pain. And this is what I will give you. Her voice was still calm, her expression was still calm, and her eyes were still calm. She looked at Xiong Chumo quietly as if he was a dead man. It was quiet in the divine hall of judgment. The moonlight fell on the balcony and her shoulder. The starlight was covered like dust falling to the ground, just like the past. However, at this moment, a voice came from a dark corner of the divine hall. It's a pity that none of this will happen. As the voice came, the corner suddenly became bright. The person standing in the corner was very bright, as if thousands of rays of light were shooting out from his body. Another person appeared in the divine hall of judgment. Still no one knew how he came in. Yi Hongyu squinted again. Her eyes were like a line or a sword. It was Zhao Nanhai. The divine skills of the great divine priest of South Sea originated from the light. At this moment he raised his aura to the peak, and his whole body was illuminated. Xiong Chumo didn't know why Zhao Nanhai showed up, but he welcomed the change. Because Zhao Nanhai's appearance probably represented the Abbey Dean's will. Yi Hongyu looked at the entrance of the divine hall of judgment. The middle-aged priest was also here. He had been handling chores in the Jisho Abbey for decades and stood behind the Abbey Dean's wheelchair for years. He did not do anything as if he was just an ordinary person. He was just like an ordinary person standing there in an ordinary way. Yi Hongyu closed her eyes and began to think. At dusk on the cliff plateau, the Abbey Dean had said that he would give Xiong Chumo's life to her. But she would not think that the middle-aged priest was here to keep his promise. Killing the hierarch now would not do Taoism any good. So the middle-aged priest was not here to kill the hierarch. What was he here for? Long Qing was in the Song Kingdom and Hengmu was in the Qinghe Kingdom. None of them were on Peach Mountain. The four people in the Divine Hall of Judgment were the four most powerful people in Taoism. Yi Hongyu opened her eyes. She was enlightened but still confused. What? Why did the Abbey Dean want to kill her? I will return to Hubei tomorrow for the new year. I have been on the road for the whole day, so there is no update. Chapter 1054. Yi Hongyu believed that the Abbey Dean was far better than the academy, especially the academy under Ning Kei's leadership. She also believed that her judgment was correct. Killing her and her brother would do Taoism no good, no matter if it was for the immediate benefits or the more far-reaching effects. That was why she had the courage to choose to retreat, to give up a lot, and to put herself in danger. She did nothing so that both sides could look at each other calmly. However, less than 2 hours after the conversation at dusk ended, the moonlight shone brightly in the night sky. The silent agreement she once thought had suddenly disappeared. The hierarch came to the divine hall of judgment to kill her, followed by Zhao Nanhai and the middle-aged priest. The three of them did not know each other would come here, but they gathered here for the same goal, to kill her. Yi Hongyu frowned. There were 2 light strokes on her pale face. Her doubts and shock could not be resolved, but she did not have time to think about it. Looking at the 3 people in the divine hall of judgment, her eyes became brighter and brighter. If Ning Kei were here, he would know that it was her reaction when she met a strong opponent. She would be vigilant but not lose confidence. She would be excited to meet a real powerhouse and then she would use the toughest means to defeat her opponent. She had shown such eyes many times in the past years of cultivation, such as when she met Ning Quebec. But her eyes were brightest when she faced Jun Mo in front of the Verdant Canyon. Tonight, her eyes were unusually bright, even brighter than they had been a few years ago in the Verdant Canyon. Because the 3 enemies she was facing were all very powerful and could be compared to Jun Mo. The hierarch of the Divine Halls of West Hill was a powerhouse in the Tianqi realm above the 5 states. Xiong Chumo's title was simple, but it did not mean that he was boring. It only meant that he was terrifying. Once he passed the threshold of the knowing destiny state, he would enter another world and a totally different level of cultivation. Yi Hongyu knew clearly that she could not defeat Xiong Chumo. If she could, she would have killed the Abbey Dean a long time ago after the right to light. Zhao Nanhai came from the South Sea. He was the descendant of the great divine priest of light who split the West Hill Divine Palace 600 years ago. His attainments in divine incantation were among the top 3 in the world. He shared the same path with the West Hill Divine Palace but did not share it. His state was unfathomable and he was at the peak of knowing destiny state. He would not be at a disadvantage even if he fought Yi Hongyu alone. Xiong Chumo and Zhao Nanhai were undoubtedly the most powerful bigwigs in the divine halls of West Hill. Compared to them, The middle-aged priest standing at the gate of the divine hall of judgment seemed very ordinary. However, he was the one who truly made Yi Hongyu feel wary. She even faintly felt a chill in her Taoist heart. The middle-aged Taoist stood at the door and did nothing, but it seemed that he had isolated the divine hall of judgment from the outside. During this time, Yi Hongyu tried several ways to inform her subordinates, but they all failed. This ordinary-looking Taoist was definitely not an ordinary Taoist. The Abbey Dean had been banished to the South Sea by the headmaster. During those years, the Jishou Abbey had been managed by this Taoist. His status in Haoyan Taoism had not fallen. How could he be ordinary? Xiong Chumo, Zhao Nanhai, the middle-aged priest, the three of them could go anywhere in the world and kill anyone. Even if Yu Lian encountered them, she would have to turn into a cicada and hide in the snow forest. Even if Mr. First encountered them, he would have to stay far away from them. Even the drunkard, the butcher, or the chief monk of scripture might be killed by them. Yi Hongyu thought to herself, how could she win? The divine hall of judgment was dead silent. On the black stone walls, the night luminescent lamps were emitting soft and beautiful light. No one knew when the pearls became bright or what triggered them. Xiong Chumo, Zhao Nanhai, and the middle-aged priest stood in silence. They occupied the divine hall from the far end, the middle, and the near end. Their aura filled the air and completely sealed off the huge hall. She was the only one in the spacious divine hall. She walked down the terrace and came to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. She raised her arm and put it on the cold seat. After a long silence, she looked at the middle-aged priest and said, Hao Yin will give his followers a chance to choose or explain. The middle-aged priest said nothing. Xiong Chumo was confused. Even though he was the hierarch of the divine hall, he had no idea why things would turn out like this. He wanted to provoke Yi Hongyu and then kill her. But why did the Abbey Dean send Zhao Nanhai and the middle-aged priest to help him? He wanted to know the explanation as well. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said emotionlessly, I still don't understand. How could a commoner like him reach above the 5 states? Is Hao Yin blind? The middle-aged priest said seriously, the power of the hierarch lies in his naivety. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows and said mockingly, naivety is childish? The middle-aged priest smiled and did not explain anything. He said, there are thousands of Taoism skills. To reach the end you still need to be naive and follow your heart. Childish or even cruel, they have nothing to do with each other. Naivety, Yi Hongyu pondered and looked at Xiong Chumo. She said, you are rotten from body to heart. You are stupid and stubborn. You believe in what you believe and listen to what you believe. Can such naivety bring you power? It is said that Qin Pipi is a rare genius in Haoyan Taoism. Is it because of this? The middle-aged priest thought for a while and said, Pipi is optimistic but knows his destiny. I think it is different. Yi Hongyu looked at his eyes and said, I don't care how naive or stupid people know their destiny. I only know that the Abbey Dean said he would give his life to me. But now it seems that he is going to do the opposite. The middle-aged priest said calmly, maybe one autumn the Abbey Dean will help the hierarch lord return to Hao Yin's divine kingdom and meet you there. This is also a way to send him off. Yi Hongyu said, sending him off after his death is a sacrifice. The middle-aged priest said, sacrifice is also a way to send him off. Yi Hongyu remained silent. When a figure like the Abbey Dean started to play tricks like a child, there were probably not many people in the world who could be his opponent. Then please explain to me. She looked at the middle-aged priest and said seriously, please give me a real explanation. She couldn't accept ending up without knowing the cause and effect. The middle-aged priest said, sorry, I can't tell you. Yi Hongyu looked at Zhao Nanhai. Zhao Nanhai, who had been silent since he entered the divine hall of judgment, finally said, sorry, I don't understand. Finally, she looked at the hierarch. Then come on. Thousands of miles away from the West Hill, there were countless fertile fields and poor villages as well as towns. It was not night yet. Under the sunlight, the remaining snow in Chang'an looked like a blank piece of painting. The remaining snow on the city wall was more well-preserved and looked like a piece of white paper that had not yet been written. On the southern city wall, there were a few ink spots on the white paper. They were tents and temporary wooden houses. There were 2 earthen stoves outside the houses. Steam rose from the stoves. The ash was darker than the snow, so it must be very hot. Ning Kei squatted beside the stove and stared at the hot ashes, waiting for the moment when the roasted sweet potatoes were completely cooked. However, he subconsciously thought of the 2 solitary graves outside the city, the 2 urns in the graves, the 2 handfuls of ashes in the urns, and the person who used to hold the ashes. Therefore, he inexplicably felt sad and stood up to walk to the wall. Standing behind the city wall, he felt a little lonely. He did not like this feeling, nor did he like to show this feeling to the sergeants behind him. So he tried to look far away and did not want to rub his eyes. The scenery inside the city wall was the streets and alleys of Chang'an City, as well as the people in the streets. He thought that this kind of city scenery was lively and could dilute his emotions. However, when he saw the Yanming Lake in the distance, he realized that this hope was just wishful thinking. The old brush pen shop was hidden in the messy streets of the eastern city and could not be seen at all. This made him even more depressed, and he could only hope to see changes in the situation as soon as possible. After killing thousands of people and staining the Sisui red, he finally won the chance to negotiate with Haoyan Taoism and the possibility of buying time. Only then could he send the 2 paragraphs to Peach Mountain. A paragraph for the Abbey Dean and a paragraph for Yi Hongyu. These 2 paragraphs seemed simple, but in fact he had used all his effort and experience in his 2 lives. All the information from the Academy and the Tang Imperial Court could only be used as footnotes to these 2 paragraphs. He naturally had high hopes for the effect of these 2 paragraphs. He was waiting for the good news from Peach Mountain, but he could never imagine what he would be waiting for. After all, he was not Sang Sang who could calculate everything. He was just an ordinary person. Chapter 1055. Ning Ke was just an ordinary person. Then why was he so confident that the 2 paragraphs he said would have a corresponding effect and would not disappear with the wind? Because the 2 paragraphs had nothing to do with psychological warfare. What he told the Abbey Dean was the knowledge of his last life, and what he told Yi Hongyu was the experience of this life. No matter how he calculated, he could not find any loopholes. No matter how he looked at it, it was right and it would work. More importantly, it was his understanding of the Abbey Dean and Yi Hongyu. He believed that he would be able to convince someone like the Abbey Dean and someone like Yi Hongyu. One of them would definitely be convinced by him. If he could convince the Abbey Dean, the human world would be under his control. That would be the best. If he could convince Yi Hongyu to split Taoism, the Academy would definitely win. As for Yi Su would die. Yi Hongyu would probably think that he was a cold-blooded bastard. Or had she already thought of this, but she still had to pin her hopes on the Academy? Ning Ke stood by the city wall and looked at the Yanming Lake in the distance. Snowflakes fell from the sky again. He felt his hands on the city wall became colder and the Array pestle in his arms was about to become a block of ice. Yes, since the day Sang Sang left the human world on that big ship and returned to the Divine Kingdom, when he was sure that she would never come back and that they would never meet again, some changes began to happen. The city of Wei was slaughtered, the general died, and so did she. He could no longer maintain enough emotional warmth for the human world, the Divine Kingdom, and the whole world. He became more and more indifferent to reality. It was not because he was numb to pain, nor was it because of disappointment. It was because the person who had warmed his heart was gone. So he was gradually becoming the Ning Ke of old. The boy who held a rusty knife in the woodshed and refused to die facing the young master and the housekeeper. The boy who walked among the corpses and cannibals and refused to die. The boy who wandered among the dangerous beasts and the even more dangerous hunters and refused to die. The boy who chopped firewood and killed people by the Shubi Lake and refused to die. That was the Ning Ke of old. He did not know right or wrong, nor did he know what morality was. He did not care about the lives of innocent people. No matter who they were just tools for him to use. Before third sister left, she told him the secret and let him know about Yi Hongyu's humiliating and painful past. He sympathized with her, but he did not hesitate to take advantage of it. Of course, Yi Hongyu was still special to him. That was why he told Qin Chi not to reveal this matter until the last moment. Even if he did, he would be careful with his words. He would not let anyone know about the past. As long as he could protect Yi Hongyu's reputation, he would feel no guilt. As for Yi Su, he did not care about the life or death of the founder of the new stream. It was Taoism's own business. If Yi Su could survive and help the new stream spread, the Academy already had a plan. If Yi Su died, he would definitely become a sage, which would be more beneficial to the spread of the new stream in the Academy. In a sense, he was a disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. He learned the skills of the Academy and inherited Koharen's legacy. But in essence he was the successor of Lotus. Jun Imo was far away in the West Wilderness, and the eldest brother was guarding the drunkard. Yu Lian and he were the ones who were really in charge of the Academy's affairs and leading the Academy forward. They had long been possessed by the devil. Before Yu Lian became the Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, she was Lotus's hope. So it seemed that the Academy was following Lotus's path instead of the headmaster of the Academy. Would Lotus feel gratified or even overjoyed if he knew this after his death? But there were still some differences. The biggest difference was that Ning Ke did not go crazy. He was calculating everything calmly and coldly. He thought deeper than the Abbey Dean thought. He sent Chu Yuxian and Qin Shi to the Peach Mountain and overturned the dining table in such a drastic way to force Taoism to respond. He knew very well that as long as the Abbey Dean did not go crazy, Yi Su would not die, and Yi Hongyu would not betray Taoism. Taoism could only cope with changes by remaining unchanged and keep the human world quiet. This ending seemed to be a merciless mockery of his plan. But no one knew that this was the Academy's original goal. Because he desperately needed more time. Ning Ke leaned against the snow wall and looked at the dark sky. He looked at the bright moon that had not yet appeared. He thought that the headmaster could not win this battle, but he had to buy more time for the Academy. In the human world, only those who had the real divine sense like the Abbey Dean and the drunkard could see the subtle changes in the divine kingdom. Ning Ke was still far from that state, but he could see it clearly with the help of the big tactical array in Chang'an. He knew that the moon was slowly darkening, which made people sad. The headmaster of the academy was gradually losing in the battle against Haotian. Time seemed to be on Taoism's side, which was extremely disadvantageous to the academy. But Ning Ke thought differently. Everything he did was to buy more time. Only with enough time could he slowly plan and solve the problem of Xiangwan Plain. Only with enough time could he wait for the good news from the depths of the western wilderness, and wait for the unbridgeable crack in Taoism to widen. More importantly, as time went by, more and more people believed in the new stream, and Haotian would become weaker and weaker. He was taught by the headmaster of the academy, inherited the youngest uncle, enlightened by Lotus and favored by Master Qishan. He cultivated Buddhism in the Nirvana world for thousands of years and traveled thousands of miles with Sangsang. He cultivated Taoism, Buddhism, and the Devil's Way. He had already understood the nature of faith. Haotian was no longer high in his eyes. Many years ago, Taoism chose Haotian for human beings. When the new stream appeared and Taoism declined, Haotian would also become weaker. It seemed too simple, but it was so correct. Therefore, the new stream and Yi Su were very important to the academy and the Tang Empire. The new stream must have time to spread to more places and win more believers. Yi Su must be the founder of the sect, alive or dead. For this, Ning Ke did not hesitate to kill thousands of people to endorse Yi Su in the new stream. But intentionally or unintentionally, he did not comment on how Taoism would deal with Yi Su. He looked at the gray sky and the falling snow in the distance and remained silent for a long time. He thought he could understand the Abbey Dean's thoughts. After all, the moon was darkening. Taoism and the academy both believed that time was in their favor. It depended on whether the academy and the new stream would work together to weaken Haotian first, or she would defeat the headmaster first. He was betting on the former. If the Abbey Dean did not agree with him, then he was betting on the latter. Ning Ke was confident about this gamble. That was because Haotian Taoism chose Haotian on behalf of human beings countless years ago. But in the end, they placed all their hopes on Haotian. Unlike the academy, Ning Ke pinned his hopes on the Tang Empire, Yi Su and the new stream. All of them placed their hopes on the human world. Hope was in the human world. Hope should be in the human world. He looked at the sky and thought so. There was a mountain outside Lincoln, and a small building suddenly appeared on the mountain. It was autumn. After winter, the wind and snow came, and so did the crowd. Hundreds and thousands of devout followers of Haotian knelt at the foot of the mountain and kept kowtowing to the small building. Naturally, no one dared to cross the line of defense of the cavalrymen of divine halls. The new emperor died and the sword garret collapsed. The subjects and people of South Jin had experienced too many things this year. Watching the war about to break out and the powerful northern neighbor about to die, the people were naturally depressed and nervous. Therefore, the small building, which was said to be the home of a living immortal, became the object of their worship. The two people in the building did not know about these things. Even if they knew, they would not care. Because of their status in the human world, it was not exaggerated to say that they were immortals. The drunkard leaned against the railing and drank. The snow on the railing was swept away by his sleeves, and some stained his clothes. Together with the leftover wine on his clothes, it was a strange and intoxicating smell. The eldest brother stood on the cliff outside the building, looking at the east in silence. A few days ago, the secret guards of the Tang Empire sent some bad news. Something might happen in the kingdom of Song, and some people from Taoism had already arrived there. He wanted to go there and have a look because Yi Su was there. But he could not leave because the drunkard was there. The drunkard should have been there, but he was drinking alone in the small building because of him. He could not travel alone. This was the most important agreement between the eldest brother and the drunkard, and also between the academy and Taoism. No one could violate it or it would be a war. If he and the drunkard did not return to the human world, there might still be hope for the human world. Chapter 1056. Firstly, I didn't update today. Recently, I haven't updated anything. I've been saying in the comments section that I don't want to be an eyesore. But today is an exception. Tomorrow is Chinese New Year's Eve, and I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. In the past few years, I've had to take 10 days off during Chinese New Year. This year is no exception. Because of my health, I've been working intermittently for the past 6 months. The good thing is that I've quit drinking and playing less, so I have more time. Therefore, I don't think I'll be taking leave this year. Although it's Chinese New Year, I'll still write when I can. Yep, I'll try my best to update tomorrow. I really want to try working on Chinese New Year's Eve. At that time, perhaps everyone will be busy, but there will always be people who are as free as me. Chapter 1057. Neither of them moved. That was the biggest reason between the academy and Taoism. The drunkard was drinking in the small building, but his eyes were fixed on the east. The eldest brother was standing on the edge of the cliff and looking at the east. They both knew what was on each other's mind. They both wanted to go to the kingdom of Song, but they could not because it would be a problem for either of them. They could not leave the small building, so they could only drink or look into the distance. It was a bit boring. After a long time they had to chat to kill time. Killing thousands of people. Ning Ke is good at chatting. That's why he is qualified to talk to Taoism, and those on the Peach Mountain have to listen to him patiently. But there is a problem. The drunkard raised his arm and wiped the wine on his lips with his sleeve. He said, "I can keep you here and force the Tang to not act rashly. That's because I have seen too many deaths and I have no love or hate for the human world." Ning Ke is not the butcher or me. He has not experienced countless deaths and lives. How can he not love or hate the human world? If he cannot make people believe this, how can he threaten the Abbey Dean? The eldest brother was silent. He remembered many years ago when he stood behind his headmaster in the back of the mountain of the academy and looked at the boy in Chang and who was born with knowledge. He remembered his headmaster's judgment. Youngest brother is a guest. He has been a guest in a foreign land for decades. Maybe he will develop some affection. But if the foreign land is not kind to him, then the affection will be easily torn apart. He said, "Others may not know, but the Abbey Dean must know this. Since Hao Yin has left the human world, the youngest brother will not love or hate the human world. How can the Abbey Dean not be afraid?" The drunkard was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Even so, even if he can make Taoism listen to him, what can he do? The best result is to buy some time." The eldest brother said, "It is already a great thing to buy some time." The drunkard tied the flagon to his waist and said indifferently, "Buying some time can't change the situation. The situation in the human world has been settled. You should know that the moon is darkening. Time is not good for the academy. Taoism can wait, but how can you? Or are you just trying to find a way to kill me and the butcher?" Eldest brother turned around and looked at him calmly and sincerely. He said, "The academy has already decided on how to kill you and the butcher. The time that youngest brother has bought will naturally be used elsewhere." The drunkard's expression froze. Suddenly he raised his eyebrows and said, "It's Yi Su. Time was the most precious thing, and it could only be used on the most important things." The drunkard believed that in the current situation, only his and the butcher's lives mattered the most. Since the academy did not spend time on the two of them, then it must be spent on someone or something that could change the situation of the human world. With his wisdom, it only took him a short time to figure out that it could only be the new stream in Yi Su. If the human world was a complicated game of chess, the deciding factor would be Yi Su in the Song Kingdom. Ning Ke was a very cold person. If he was sure that he could not solve the chess game and save Yi Su, he would definitely abandon Yi Su without hesitation and then try to gain the most benefits from it. The drunkard thought in silence and thought that if he were in Ning Ke's position, he would probably make the same choice. The situation was complicated, but the situation in the Song Kingdom was very simple. Even a child could count the number of powerhouses in Taoism and the academy. If Taoism really wanted to kill Yi Su at all costs, the academy could not stop it, because Yi Su did not choose to go to Chang and to accept the academy's protection. Youngest brother talked to the Abbey Dean because he wanted Yi Su to live. The eldest brother looked at the drunkard and said, he believed that he could persuade the Abbey Dean. The drunkard asked, "What about Hao Yin?" The eldest brother looked at him quietly and said slowly and firmly, "Hao Yin can be gone." The drunkard looked at him and said for a long time, "I can't accept it." For the academy, Hao Yin could be gone. Even for Taoism and the Abbey Dean, Hao Yin could be gone. But for the drunkard and the butcher, Hao Yin could not be gone. If Ning Ke could persuade the Abbey Dean, the human world would return to peace, the new stream would spread, Hao Yin would be weakened, and the divine kingdom would be destroyed and replaced by the human world one day. Then where could he and the butcher find eternity? A few years ago, Sang Sang came to the small town and made a promise to him and the butcher in the butcher's shop. If she died, what would be the point of those promises? You don't have to accept it. The eldest brother said. Youngest brother said that you and the butcher must accept it. If he could persuade the Abbey Dean, then the first thing the human world would do is to kill you. The drunkard felt the wine was a little strong today. Otherwise, why would he feel a little tipsy? He smiled sarcastically and said, "It's not that easy to kill us. Facing the whole human world, even you two have to give way." The eldest brother looked at him and said calmly, "Because you are not the headmaster. He is the human world. You are not the youngest uncle. You have to go alone even if there are thousands of people. You will give way to him and hide behind the Taoist tree to see what the human world will choose. This is actually acceptance." It was a judgment that came from the eldest brother's heart. He never lied, which was even more powerful. It was like a rough knife chopping on the drunkard's head. Chapter 1058. Many years later, Ning Ke walked through that shabby alley and heard the sound of reading from the depths of the alley. He listened to the familiar voice explaining history to the children and felt very emotional, because it happened to be talking about the things that happened in a certain winter. Many people felt the same way as him. Every time they recalled that winter, they would feel a little unwilling, a little sad, but also a little lucky. Their emotions were very complicated. No matter what kind of emotion they had, that winter would definitely be a winter that the human world would never forget. Because in that winter, the human world seemed to be only a step away from peace. In the war between the Academy and Haoyan Taoism, there seemed to be infinite hope in front of them. On the desolate wilderness, snowflakes danced wildly. The Tang army camped thousands of feet away became very blurred. As for the Tang general Huaying, no one knew where he was. Ada squinted his eyes. His childish face occasionally flashed with some ruthlessness. His slightly blue lips moved slightly as he kept silently praying for the Tingri heaven. He had been waiting for a long time in the wilderness of wind and snow, but he did not make a move. At first, it was because he sensed the destructive arrow intent from thousands of miles away in the south. Now he did not make a move because of the fleet that was slowly approaching from the depths of the wind and snow. The national master who was patrolling the grassland left Helan City and came to the Chiching village. No one knew what he was here for. No one dared to disobey him, not even Ada. Although he was a gift from the Tingri heaven to the grassland, he was also a nominal disciple of the national master. The fleet stopped in the snow. The national master's weathered and calm voice tore through the wind and snow and entered Ada's ears. "What the Tangs want most is to see us lose our minds." Ada looked at the Tang army in the opposite wind and snow and said, "I can kill him." The national master's voice sounded again. "At that moment, you will also be killed." Ada said firmly, "You are here. I'm not afraid." He was opposing the national master's will. In fact, he was expressing his utmost respect for the national master. He firmly believed that as long as the national master was here, the iron arrow from the south would not be able to hurt him. Even after the right to light, no one knew exactly how high the state of the national master of the Golden Tribe was. Especially after the rain this spring, no one knew if the grassland powerhouse who served the Tingri heaven devoutly had any improvement. Under the premise of his vigilance, together with the dozens of powerful grassland high priests, Ning Ke's iron arrows might really be stopped. Ada felt that he should be braver in this situation. He wanted to kill the Tang general and lead the cavalry to crush the Tang army. Only in this way could he inflict pain on the person in the far south. The imperial tutor was silent for a moment before replying to his disciples' trust in him. "The problem is that we don't know where she is." Yes, this was the biggest problem. Although the iron arrow pointing at the grassland in the distant south was terrifying, as long as one was prepared, one could always find a way to deal with it. As long as one controlled the state or the output of psyche power, the iron arrow could not affect this place at all. But what about the other person? That person was born and grew up in the wilderness. Although he had disappeared for decades, as long as he was still alive, he would be the most legendary powerhouse on the grassland and the most horrible demon. Lin Wu, the Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, the 23-year cicada cultivation, the third sister of the Academy, Yu Lian. No matter what her name or identity was, she would always be the most feared person of the grassland barbarians. In recent years, it was rumored that she was in the eastern wilderness. Therefore, the powerhouses of the Left Tent Palace were gradually declining and almost all of them were killed by her. Therefore, the national master and the 13 priests had been guarding outside the city of Helan. This winter, the national master finally left the city of Helan and came to the field in the south. No one knew what he was here for, but everyone knew that it must have something to do with Yu Lian. Ada understood. He looked at the Tang army in the south unwillingly and turned back. He walked into the carriage and retreated to the city of Wei with his teacher. I heard that the Divine Hall is negotiating with the academy. Yes. So there can be no war for the time being? Yes. Peace? I hate this word. That's for Hao Yin to decide. As the master and disciple conversed, the carriages moved further and further away. Not long after, they disappeared into the depths of the wind and snow. Still, no one knew where the imperial advisor was going or what he was going to do. However, everyone knew that the imperial advisor was waiting for someone to appear. He was waiting for the arrival of the Iron Arrow. Naturally, he was also waiting for Hao Yin's choice. Hao Yin decided everything in the human world. To put it simply, it was preordained. There was a sense of helplessness in the word, but also the calmness of obedience. However, Sang Sang had already left the human world. How could she tell her will to the billions of believers? When she was silent like she was in the past, the so-called will of Hao Yin was just the will of Taoism. To be precise, it was the will of the Abbey Dean. Hungmu stood in front of tens of thousands of cavalrymen and looked at the verdant canyon that was destined to be written in the history books. He slowly raised his right arm. On the square of the capital of the Kingdom of Song, the cavalrymen who besieged the followers of the new stream reined in and retreated. The divine priests and deacons stopped attacking because there was a new order from the Taoist Hall. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. Chang and City was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. Everyone was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. Only Long Qing seemed to know nothing. He could not hear the nervous breathing of thousands of people outside the wall and did not receive the latest news from the Divine Hall. He felt that the pile of firewood in the yard was not spectacular enough. He picked up the chopper again and chopped the firewood unskillfully, imagining the fire that would come later. The night was getting longer and the human world was getting colder. The warm West Hill Divine Kingdom also had a few heavy snowfalls this winter. The cliff plateau was covered with residual snow. Under the moonlight, the traces of the wheelchair were very clear. The middle-aged priest stood behind the wheelchair and looked solemn. He thought that Hao Yin Taoism could solve Ning Kei's situation by remaining unchanged. But it seemed that the Abbey Dean did not think so. Ning Kei only wants Hao Yin Taoism to suppress the enemy? But it doesn't make sense. The middle-aged priest looked up at the bright moon in the night sky and thought about the possible battle in the distant Divine Kingdom. He frowned and said, "The headmaster of the academy is getting darker. The longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for the academy." The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair and looked at the world under the moonlight. He was calm and silent. The middle-aged priest suddenly understood and said, "So this is what he wants too." It was related to the root of faith. He could only vaguely understand it, but he could not explain it clearly. As he said this, the temperature on the cliff plateau suddenly dropped and the cold wind blew. The bright moon was still in the sky, but snow fell from the clouds somewhere. The snow came very quickly and the thick snowflakes fluttered in the air. It did not take long for the cliff and the wheelchair to be covered with a layer of snow. The Abbey Dean was also covered by the snowflakes. The words that came out of his lips suddenly became colder after being soaked by the snowflakes, just like the meaning in his words. He wants to talk to the world. I also want to know what he wants to talk about. Unfortunately, he has been imprisoned in Chang'an for half a year. He thought he understood everything, but he was wrong after all. The Abbey Dean said, "He can't see clearly himself or Yi Hongyu. Most importantly, he can't see clearly what kind of situation the human world is in now." The middle-aged priest said, "He doesn't stand high enough, so he can't see far enough." There was no one in the human world who could stand as high as the Abbey Dean. The middle-aged priest pushed the wheelchair toward the cliff plateau. The wheelchair left 2 deep marks on the snow, which were then broken by new footprints. It was like the fate line of the human world. The story Ning Kei told me was very interesting. In the words of the Academy, very interesting means very meaningful. It is indeed difficult to convince people, but at least it can be used to scare people. The Abbey Dean said with a smile, "The problem is that there is no God in his story. There is no God in that world. But in our world there is Hao Yin." The middle-aged priest's expression became more and more solemn. His footsteps became heavier and heavier. The footprints on the snow became deeper and deeper, as if they were going to be deeply carved into the cliff stones. Hao Yin, of course, was the most serious topic. Of course, as I said before, I have to agree with the Academy's judgment. So do I. Taoism will definitely fail and Hao Yin will eventually perish. The Abbey Dean's smile suddenly disappeared. He was expressionless, but the emotions in the depths of his eyes became extremely complicated. At first he was confused and even afraid, but eventually he became calm. But so what? The master of Hao Yin Taoism said that Taoism would be destroyed. The most devout believer and the most powerful spokesperson of Hao Yin said that Hao Yin would die. If these words were to spread to the human world, what kind of shock and chaos would it bring? But the Abbey Dean had already calmed down after saying these words. He looked at the human world with a smile without thinking about anything. He looked so quiet and tranquil, as cute as a newborn child. Ning Ke was right about one thing. Taoism and the Academy, the headmaster and I, in a sense, are indeed the same people. We are walking on the same path and we all have ideas about the human world. It is just that we have chosen different paths. Our views on the future of the world and the future of mankind are different, so the methods we choose and the ultimate goals are also different. Ning Ke will not agree with the path I choose, so there will be no peace. How can we really be the same people when we are so different? The Abbey Dean said, as you said, he did not stand high enough and did not see far enough. He did not see the most important person. But I did. So the Academy has lost. The question that Ning Ke set for Taoism seemed to be a dilemma, forcing Taoism to remain calm, and there was no solution at all. But for the Abbey Dean the question was actually very simple. Yi Su's life and Yi Hongyu's departure were not a problem for the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean thought that he could just kill the brother and sister. He did not care that Yi Su might become a sage or how far the new church would spread. He did not care that Yi Hongyu would die or betray the divine hall of judgment, or that the Taoism would be in chaos. He did not care because everything was predestined. Taoism belonged to Hao Yin Taoism and Hao Yin Taoism. Hao Yin himself had admitted defeat, so how could her Taoism win? The world outside the cliff was the human world. It was covered with snow, and it was impossible to tell the sky from the ground, as if they had been connected. So what? After all, it is the matter of mankind. If Hao Yin is dead, then we will find a new one. If Taoism is destroyed, then we will create a new one. That is all. The Abbey Dean said. Chapter 1059. The middle-aged priest looked pale. His tranquil Taoist heart, which could never be shaken by the spring rain and autumn wind, suddenly trembled uncontrollably and even showed signs of collapse. What he heard, the hidden meaning behind the words, and the Abbey Dean's thoughts were too cruel and terrifying for the followers of Taoism. It was said that the great divine priest of light was the closest to Hao Yin. But he knew that the Abbey Dean had always been the closest to Hao Yin since 1,000 years ago. When Hao Yin came to the human world a few years ago and the Abbey Dean met her, the closeness became real in a theological sense. They did not see each other but met each other. Was he afraid because he saw her? No, he was no longer afraid after seeing it. He dared to think about it, kill it, destroy it, and seize it. Compared to this, whether it was Lotus ambition, the Academy's ideals, or Hao Yin's own thoughts, they were all inferior. Ning Ke's question was even more ridiculous. The middle-aged Taoist did not question his judgment. He looked at the snow on the cliffs and felt the cold wind blowing against his face. He suddenly felt a little sad because he was about to see the destruction of a complete old world. The old world that he had once worshipped and protected with all his heart, the world that he cared about. Is there really no other way? The flame of the new stream will burn the entire human world. The old Taoism and the old divine halls will all become the new sacrifices in the fire. Even if the headmaster of Academy and the Tang Empire are destroyed, Taoism cannot change the result. But why should we be sad? It's just nirvana. We should celebrate. Is the nirvana that Buddha mentioned going to happen in this winter? That monk only cares about himself. Why would he care about the entire human world? What should we do next? The fate of the human world was decided by heaven. The Abbey Dean turned his eyes from the night sky to the world of wind and snow at the foot of the mountain. He looked at it for a while and continued, but now it's in the human world. Of course we have to find her first. Ning Ke asked him to care more about the human world. In fact, he had always cared about it more than anyone else. How could he not care about it when it was supposed to be in heaven? After saying this, the Abbey Dean said no more. He looked at the wind and snow outside the cliff, at the villages and fields on the other side of the wind and snow, and at the moonlight that could not be stopped by the wind and snow. He smiled and said nothing. On the curtain of the night, the clouds were sometimes in the east and sometimes in the west. Although snowflakes kept falling, they could not cover everything. The moonlight shrouded the whole world. The wind on the cliff rolled up the snowflakes and danced with the moonlight. As the night deepened, it became colder and colder. The Abbey Dean sat in the chair for a long time, but he was still energetic. A few years ago, during the battle in Chang'an, he was seriously injured by the disciples of the academy with the help of the God-stunning array. Later he met Sang Sang and was punished by Haotian. Since then, he had become a disabled old man with his ocean of qi and mountain of snow destroyed. Logically speaking, it would be extremely difficult for him to endure such a bitter cold night. However, he just sat there quietly without coughing. His face was not pale and there were even 2 red spots on his cheeks. His expression was always so calm. His eyes were filled with a yearning for the beautiful scenery of the world, and he was curious about the moonlight, snowflakes, and the sky that sprinkled moonlight and snowflakes. He was as innocent as a child. Hengmu and Ada, the divine sons left by Haotian in the human world, often looked innocent as well. However, that innocence came from their alienation from the human world and their own age. The Abbey Dean's innocence was different. He looked at the human world quietly and thought about it. He seemed to be ignorant and omniscient. He was a little dull but not disgusting. He was a little cute but not annoying. He was different from Hengmu and the others. He was also different from the previous Abbey Dean. He was calmer, like an unintentional cloud that floated out of the mountain, pure and admirable. When he entered Chang'an, he flew in the wind like an immortal. In the eyes of the common people, he was like a real immortal. After he was disabled, he became a real mortal. From an immortal to a human, he was a Jinren. The middle-aged priest looked at him in the chair and felt the innocent aura. He vaguely understood something inside with emotion. It turned out that there was a world above the tranquility. The Abbey Dean suddenly moved. His hands left his knees and slowly landed on the armrest of the wheelchair. The snow under his palms melted into spring water due to the heat. His expression was as pleasant as spring water. The middle-aged priest was shocked and speechless. He was shocked because his guess had become a reality. It seemed that the guess that excited him was about to become a reality. The middle-aged priest's hands on the wheelchair trembled a little. The Abbey Dean's scheme was broken by the academy and his people were hurt in Chang'an. However, it was Haotian who really turned him into a mortal. What did this mean? The Abbey Dean stood up and left the wheelchair. It was like the action that human beings had done tens of thousands of years ago. The snowflakes mixed with the moonlight fell slowly on the cliff plateau. The cold wind kept blowing, making the Abbey Dean's indigo Taoist robe flutter. However, it could not mess up his white hair. Look, it really looks like a dog. The Abbey Dean looked at the night sky and said slowly. The middle-aged priest did not understand what the Abbey Dean meant. He also did not know that 20 years ago, the headmaster of the academy raised his cup to the sky and said something that sounded different but actually had the same meaning. After saying this, the Abbey Dean clasped his hands behind his back and walked down the cliff in the wind and snow. His indigo robe fluttered in the wind and snow. In the deep night, he left Peach Mountain and disappeared. Looking at the footprints left by the Abbey Dean, the middle-aged priest was silent. The Abbey Dean had already walked down Peach Mountain. All he could see was his back view and his heart filled with awe. After a long time he came to his senses. He looked at the wheelchair and smiled. He pushed the empty wheelchair to the edge of the cliff and pushed it down. The cliff was so high that the sound of falling snow could be heard. Naturally, the sound of the wheelchair falling could not be heard here. No one knew when the Abbey Dean would return to the Peach Mountain. The middle-aged priest quickly calmed down. He was a true powerhouse of Taoism and he had absolute confidence in the Abbey Dean. Taoism had existed for countless years and had produced many great figures. They had contributed a lot of wisdom to mankind. For thousands of years, the glory of the human world seemed to be concentrated on the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy. But Taoism was still Taoism and the Abbey Dean was still the Abbey Dean. The middle-aged priest left the cliff plateau and went to the Divine Hall of Revelation. No one knew what he said to Zhao Nanhai in the Divine Hall. But then Zhao Nanhai silently followed him to the Divine Hall of Judgment. At that time, the hierarch had already arrived. Looking at the woman wearing the divine robe of judgment on the terrace, the hierarch admired her. She walked to the seat of heavenly black jade in the moonlight and bloomed like a flower of blood. He had always admired her. He had liked her since they were little. But he had to kill her today. The Abbey Dean had decided the life and death of her and her brother. Please give me a real explanation. Sorry, I can't say. Something went wrong when I logged in. I have to go to the village tomorrow, so I have no time to write. I hope everyone has a good time and drink less. Chapter 1060. The 13th of February had to be a very important day. The academy had 2 floors and there were 13 disciples on the second floor. Ning Ke was the 13th. The coming night was a story about idiots. There were a bunch of idiots in the academy, living happily, living like idiots. This year I wasn't happy. I was just a little idiot. I perfectly fulfilled most of the promises I made to everyone before the new year. I only drank some wine on the 4th day of the new year. Other than that, I didn't touch a drop of alcohol. I didn't go out to play either. I didn't waste my time. However, I couldn't do anything. Since the 5th day of the new year, I basically stayed at home to recuperate. Well, what an indescribable failure. Looking back at the past 6 months, I really had a lot of feelings and annoyances. Tomorrow I would resume updating. I didn't want to be so intermittent anymore. That would be too weak. I couldn't allow myself to be so weak anymore. Because I was strong and the stories I wrote were very good. I wanted to overwhelm everything. I used the words I wrote many years ago when I wrote about Wuxia to encourage myself. At the same time, I wanted to encourage everyone. No matter what kind of situation we encounter, we must not be depressed. We can't be depressed. We can only be lush. That is unbridled growth. If I were a fish, I would jump out of the sea. If I were a flower, I would bloom wildly on the other side of the shore. I would bloom everywhere and keep on blooming. I would be an idiot. This was probably what a weirdo meant. I just wanted to be that weirdo. If you pluck me and stick me in cow dung, will you thank me when I see the end? I don't think I will thank you. I thank you all. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1061. Yi Hongyu's calm voice was heard in the dim divine hall of judgment. She looked at Hierarch Xiong Chumo and slowly lifted her right hand from the seat of heavenly black jade, just like a ship leaving a southern port. Then let's do it. There was no fear in her beautiful eyes. Her calm emotions revealed a strong self-confidence and an indomitable determination. Even this hopeless battle could not make her feel any despair. The hierarch Zhao Nanhai and the middle-aged priest stood at 3 different corners of the hall, looking at her in silence. Such a powerful team had no reason to doubt themselves. Even if the woman beside the seat of heavenly black jade was Yu Lian, they were confident that they could take her down. But they still had to be cautious. Because tonight their opponent was the youngest great divine priest of judgment in the history of the divine halls of West Hill. She was probably the best fighter in the Peach Mountain in the past 1,000 years. She would not win, but she would not lose so easily. Yi Hongyu's hand left the seat of heavenly black jade. The dim light in the hall changed as if thousands of rays of light were picked up by her fingers like a spider web. The moonlight and starlight outside the hall refracted beautifully. The space in the hall was about half the height of a person, and there seemed to be an ocean of stars. She stood quietly in the starlight, as holy and beautiful as a virgin in the divine kingdom. As her hand moved, the ocean of stars gradually floated up. The moonlight and starlight refracted more and more intensely. Finally, they arched and formed a geometric shape of light. It was a combination of sharp lines. It was a sword. She held a sword made of light. The surface of the sword was as smooth as clear lake water. The surface of the sword reflected the blood-red robe of judgment, as if there was a red fish swimming in it. It was an illusory sword, but it was real. It was her Taoist sword. Outside the hall, a gust of wind blew. The snowflakes danced in the air, making the moonlight and starlight restless. The wind poured into the hall through the balcony and touched the sword in her hand, waking up the red fish in the sword. Yi Hongyu woke up. Her clothes were the first thing that woke her up. The blood-red divine robe of judgment trembled slightly, like a red flower in the morning that had absorbed too much dew. The red flower trembled slightly. She appeared in front of Zhao Nanhai dozens of feet away. Her first attack was on Zhao Nanhai. Maybe it was because the great divine priest from the South Sea was the weakest among the 3. Zhao Nanhai was at the peak of the knowing destiny state, but he was still relatively weak. This fact could only make people feel even more hopeless. Tonight's battle in the divine hall of judgment was a real battle between the strongest. For her, it was a losing battle. But she still wanted to give it a try because she was not used to giving up before the battle was over. Just like what she had told Ning Ke many years ago, since they were going to fight, they had to win. Yi Hongyu floated in the sea of stars like a bloody flower. She did not think of anything but victory. She was so focused that it was terrifying. Her picturesque eyes were like mountains and rivers. Her black hair was like a waterfall, and she wore a divine crown that was as heavy as mountains and rivers. As the great divine priest of judgment, she carried the mountains and rivers with her. A green mountain and a stream of water came from the night sky. Even with Zhao Nanhai's cultivation base and Taoist heart, he could not help but feel shocked. Zhao Nanhai wanted to evade, but his feet were rooted to the smooth floor of the Taoist hall like they were made of iron. He was very calm and knew that he could not evade. He could not even think about it. Yi Hongyu chose him to evade for a moment. Zhao Nanhai could not evade or retreat. Because if he did, he would leave an escape route for Yi Hongyu. Tonight was a battle between the strongest cultivators of Haoyin Taoism. They could not afford to leave an escape route. They could not leave an escape route. They could not leave an escape route, not only for the enemy but also for themselves. Looking at the mountains and rivers falling from the night sky and the beautiful woman in the painting of mountains and rivers, Zhao Nanhai's expression became extremely determined. His Taoist robe was set ablaze in the cold wind. He was the current great divine priest of the South Sea. He had inherited the legacy of the great divine priest of light from 600 years ago. He had cultivated the most profound West Hill divine skills and was burning the purest Haoyin divine flame. He burned himself and turned himself into a candle, illuminating the dark Taoist hall. Yi Hongyu came in front of him and entered the world of light. She held the virtual sword made of light and looked calm. She did not stab out. Her divine robe fluttered and looked a little pale under the light. She entered the world of light just like a vermilion bird, diving into the forest without hesitation. The world of light and the burning forest were filled with horrible killing intent. Would the vermilion bird's feathers be burnt? Would the flower of blood bloom? Yi Hongyu looked indifferent. She did not care because she was also burning. Endless Haoyin divine flame gushed out from her body and penetrated the bloody divine robe of judgment. It broke through Zhao Nanhai's Haoyin divine flame and swept across the forest. The forest was burning. The vermilion bird in the forest also started burning. It spread its wings in the night sky and spat out flames. Countless sparks splashed on the stone walls. The petals of the flower of blood turned into transparent flames. It was chilling and horrible. West Hill divine skills against West Hill divine skills. Haoyin divine flame against Haoyin divine flame. She was the great divine priest of judgment, but she was also the Tao addict who knew everything. She had learned the West Hill divine skills since she was young. How could she be unfamiliar with the Haoyin divine flame? Who was more powerful, her divine skill or Zhao Nanhai's? They were both at the peak of the knowing destiny state. They were both powerful divine skills. One was old and ruthless while the other was young and powerful. If it were any other time there would be no answer. But tonight was special. Zhao Nanhai was here to kill. He would not risk his life no matter how determined he looked. Yi Hongyu was burning her soul and life, even though she was expressionless. The divine hall of judgment shone brightly, and the temperature suddenly rose. The tables and chairs engraved with flowers instantly turned into ashes, and even the black jade throne began to emit green smoke. The hierarch looked serious and took a step into the battlefield. The middle-aged priest lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, a howl came from the blazing sea of divine flame. The howl was clear and sharp. It sounded like a bird, a legendary bird. Xiong Chumo's expression changed again. The middle-aged priest still lowered his head. His face was illuminated by the Haoyin divine flame and looked serious. Sparks flew and the flames split. A path appeared in the sea of fire. A blood-red phoenix flew out from the depths of the sea. As soon as it spread its wings, the divine hall started to burn. There was no real phoenix in the divine hall of judgment. There was only the purest and most solemn Haoyin divine flame. She flew in front of the divine flame like a proud and violent phoenix. The light dimmed and Zhao Nanhai appeared on the ground. His face was pale and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. Obviously he was badly injured. He looked at the phoenix with admiration and sympathy. The youngest judge in the history of Haoyin Taoism was unbelievably powerful. However, she had to die because she was so powerful. The more powerful she was, the more Haoyin Taoism would not allow her to live. Zhao Nanhai was defeated and injured in this contest of divine skills. But Yi Hongyu did not achieve her goal. Zhao Nanhai did not step aside and she was still in the battlefield. She did not defeat Zhao Nanhai, the weakest one, at the beginning. It was a pity that she could not leave. But there was no sign of regret on her face. Or maybe it was because Zhao Nanhai was not her real target. The fire of Haoyin's divine flame that burned the stone walls made her graceful body heat up a little. Or maybe it was just a warm-up. Under the cover of the raging sacred flame, she came to Xiong Chumo at an incredible speed in the hall and in the chaos of light. Or maybe this was her goal. In the deepest part of her eyes, there were countless stars vanishing. It was hard to see what she was thinking. Her right hand holding the sword was hidden in the blood-red gown of judgment. It was hard to see if it was stiff or not. She was holding a virtual sword in her hand, which was also her natal Taoist sword. She did not use her sword when fighting against Zhao Nanhai. Now that she was here, would she use her sword or not? The next moment, her sword was still in the scabbard. The sword and the scabbard were both fake and real. The next moment, the scabbard was gone and the sword appeared in front of her. She used her sword. An extremely sharp sword style was generated in the bright Taoist temple. It tore the air in the temple. The sword style that stood at the peak of the 5 states was about to tear the space apart. Her sudden and decisive turn in the air was unimaginably fast. This sword was even faster. Even Liu Bai and Jun Mo at their peak could only be as fast as this. In front of the sword intent, if it was any other expert, they would probably be cut into 2 by the sword. But the one she was going to kill was the master of the divine halls of West Hill. It was difficult. Xiong Chumo looked serious. His pupils shrunk to the size of black beans. He had been prepared since she left the Sea of Fire. When the sword style came to him, he had already reached his hands into the night sky. The night sky was dark. There was no light. But the divine kingdom was right there. Facing a dangerous enemy like Yi Hongyu, Xiong Chumo did not hesitate to use his strongest move. It was also the key to victory. An extremely powerful force, a force that didn't belong to the human world, came from the depths of the night sky, from the divine kingdom, across tens of thousands of miles, through countless clouds and mountains, and poured into his body. Tianqi. Yi Hongyu's sword was already at the peak of the 5 states. It was only a hair's breadth away from the sky. But Xiong Chumo's state had surpassed the 5 states. It came from the sky. Even if it was only a hair's breadth away, it was still a distance that was hard to cross. Xiong Chumo's thin and short body suddenly became extremely mighty and huge, like a heavenly god. In his body, there seemed to be an endless amount of power surging and boiling. He reached out his right palm and slapped at Yi Hongyu. The childlike palm swayed like a cattail leaf fan in the process of breaking the wind. The huge fan-like palm grabbed the throat of the fire phoenix. In the dazzling white divine light, the fire phoenix screeched shrilly. Although it was difficult to write, it was a very good start. Happy holidays and interesting life. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1062. Xiong Chumo stood in front of the divine light and gripped the phoenix's throat mercilessly. The scorching Taoism temple echoed with shrill cries. The cries were getting louder, angrier, and more painful. The phoenix struggled angrily. Countless blazing white streams of light peeled off from its body and fell to the ground, igniting a sea of fire. That austere sword essence, hidden in its body, was constantly exploding. Xiong Chumo's face suddenly turned pale, but his expression was still indifferent. His short and skinny body became as majestic and powerful as a god under the support of the majestic power. Many people could not understand Xiong Chumo's power, such as Yi Hongyu. Since the title of the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill could not give a cultivator innately powerful, then where did his power come from? How could this wretched and disgusting dwarf have a state above the 5 states? Just because he was Hao Yin's dog? Some people tried to come up with an answer, but it was all speculation. Xiong Chumo was still standing behind the light screen. He was so powerful that he gripped fate and the phoenix's throat. It was unfair that he continued to be invincible. Xiong Chumo's huge palm moved forward. The night sky above Peach Mountain seemed to move closer to the ground with his movement. An unimaginably powerful force slapped down. The flame phoenix let out a mournful cry and its feathers scattered in all directions. The peerless sword intent that shot out from its body was unable to resist the pressure of the night sky and shattered into countless pieces. The sword style was smashed by Xiong Chumo's palm. Countless pieces of sword intent shot out and landed on Yi Hongyu's body. Countless tears appeared on her blood-red robe of judgment, and blood seeped out from within. That was the horrifying backfire. Yi Hongyu looked pale. The stars in her eyes were fading away at a faster speed. Her red right sleeve turned into nothingness under the power of Tianqi, revealing her jade-like wrist. The sword style was gone, but she was still holding the sword in her hand. Her black hair danced in the wind like a waterfall under the strong wind. She looked at Xiong Chumo with emotionless and soulless eyes. Her soul was burning, her life was burning, and the blood that flowed out of the countless wounds on her body was burning. She used the divine arts of the Western tomb to burn her body and soul into a pure and holy divine light. She wanted to hug Xiong Chumo. Unlike the humiliating hug many years ago, her hug had no other meaning. It was not fanatical, not cold, just calm, a calm invitation to die with him. Looking at the burning Yi Hongyu, Xiong Chumo's pupils constricted as he sensed the hidden horror. His body began to tremble and his face became even paler. A thunderous roar burst out from his lips. Heavenly beheading? He was the master of the West Hill Divine Palace, and his voice was like thunder. In the middle of the night on the Peach Mountain, thunder boomed through the peaks and valleys, waking up the hibernating creatures under the earth and startling the thick clouds that no longer squeezed out snowflakes. Then it arrived at the unknown divine kingdom in the depths of the night. The night sky slowly pressed down on the ground. The overwhelming and unstoppable power in the divine hall of judgment became clearer and more direct. Xiong Chumo's palm finally broke Yi Hongyu's remaining sword style and the holy flame. His palm landed on her shoulder and pressed on her. There was a muffled sound. The cloth on Yi Hongyu's right shoulder was torn to shreds, revealing her bare skin. Her shoulder still exuded a fresh fragrance amidst the blazing flames and terrifying power. Her bare shoulders were a perfect contrast between holiness and terror. It was very alluring. Xiong Chumo's palm landed on her shoulder. In an instant he recalled a lot of things. His eyes changed slightly, and his pupils became deeper like a bean. Like a bean oil lamp, he felt a bit gloomy, satisfied, greedy, and regretful. She died as soon as the palm landed. Even if she was Yi Hongyu, she would definitely die after being hit by Hao Yin's power. The only thing that puzzled Xiong Chumo was that her eyes were still so indifferent. Could she be so obsessed with cultivation that she could ignore life and death? The next moment, Xiong Chumo realized why Yi Hongyu was so calm. Because she would not let his palm fall on her body as easily as he did years ago. There was a wound on her right shoulder. Just like other parts of her body, it was dripping with blood. The gown of judgment was torn. However, under the blood, deep in the wound, there was a golden thread shining. This golden thread was the biggest difference between her and ordinary cultivators. There were countless powerhouses in the cultivation world, but she and Ning Ke were the real exceptions. They were the real ruthless ones. She was obsessed with cultivation. She was not crazy enough to ignore life and death, but she was crazy enough to turn her body into a sword. That was her real Taoist sword. The gown of judgment was torn. The scabbard was cracked. The sword was officially unsheathed. The golden thread bounced up and danced gracefully. It landed on Xiong Chumo's palm softly. Compared to the giant palm, the golden thread was softer than the thinnest barnyard grass in autumn. But it was her natal life. It was tougher than the sharpest sword, unbreakable and indestructible. With a slight sound, a thin red line appeared on Xiong Chumo's index finger that was about to touch her shoulder. Blood flowed out from the line. Then the white bone was broken. Xiong Chumo's index finger fell off the branch like a ripe fruit. Xiong Chumo's face turned extremely pale. There was endless pain in the depths of his eyes. His thin face was filled with endless anger. Then he became calm again. He kept pressing his palm down expressionlessly. Even if all his fingers were broken and his entire palm fell off, he would still slap Yi Hongyu to death. Because this was the best chance. However, Yi Hongyu would not give him another chance. Yi Hongyu closed her eyes. Then she withdrew all her sword style. The torn gown of judgment rolled up like a withered leaf and wrapped her body. Not a single trace of sword style leaked out. Even her vitality was gone. Just a moment ago she was like a sword, but now she had turned into an ignorant and stubborn rock. Just like the moss-covered stones at the bottom of the Ming Lake outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine many years ago. There were 2 sword marks on those stones. Many years ago, those marks were made by Koharan. Later some new marks were made by her. Now she turned herself into those stones. The wounds on her body were the same as the sword marks. What was she trying to do? There was no time to think or analyze. Xiong Chumo's palm finally fell on her shoulder. With a loud crack, her shoulder bones were all broken and blood gushed out. Xiong Chumo was confused. Zhao Nanhai was confused. They did not know why she would rather be seriously injured than to take the blow. At that moment, the middle-aged Taoist at the other end of the temple raised his head and took a look. She was like a real stone that was hit by the power from the sky. Speed was determined by power. She took the power that no one had ever taken before. Therefore she could move at an unimaginable speed. Except for the distanceless state, there was no one else in the world that could move at such a speed. She flew in the divine hall of judgment. The torn gown of judgment left a series of shadows. The friction with the air caused the gown to burn. The stones turned into meteorites with a fiery tail. Or, it was another form of the fire phoenix. Ever since he entered the divine hall of judgment, the middle-aged priest had been silent with his head lowered. Until now he finally looked up. He looked up at the sea of divine light, the figure in the light, the meteorite that was about to hit him, and the silent fire phoenix. He finally understood what she was going to do. Yi Hongyu's target was him from the very beginning. Not Zhao Nanhai, not Xiong Chumo, but him. The competition with Zhao Nanhai was just a warm-up. She took Xiong Chumo's Tianqi head-on and sped up. The two powerhouses attacked with all their strength, but Yi Hongyu was just borrowing the momentum. She didn't hesitate to suffer heavy injuries to adjust her state to the strongest, most violent moment. What? Just to kill him? Yi Hongyu came so fast that the middle-aged priest only had to look up before she arrived. The fire phoenix burned the hall. The meteorite fell. Even the Abbey Dean could not avoid it. The middle-aged priest realized that the Abbey Dean had underestimated Yi Hongyu's ability. The young great divine priest of judgment was indeed a genius. Her attainment in divine incantation was even better than Zhao Nanhai's. She had cultivated her own body into a natal Taoist sword and turned herself into a stubborn rock. That was the legendary great divine priest of light who had comprehended the stone array tactics 1,000 years ago. The only one who knew the stone array formation was the queen of the great river kingdom. Where did she learn it? The middle-aged priest could not figure it out. But he had to catch her. Otherwise, the fire phoenix would fly out of the divine hall of judgment, break the Peach Mountain, and gain true freedom. Taoism would never allow that to happen. The middle-aged priest reached out his right hand and pointed with a finger. His movement was very slow. The fire phoenix came so fast that it was unparalleled. His movement was so slow, but it was faster than the fire phoenix. He looked serious and his finger was extremely heavy. Know it and guard it, the natural stream. It was the unique skill of the Jisho Abbey, the natural stream magical finger. The middle-aged priest's natural stream magical finger was much more powerful than Chen Pippi's. With one finger the world was at peace. The Haotian's divine flame in the divine hall of judgment was like a frozen flame, no longer shaking. The remaining power from the sky seemed to have sensed the meaning of the finger and calmed down. The fire phoenix's tail disappeared instantly. The raging meteorite suddenly showed its true face. How could the moss hurt anyone? The middle-aged priest used his most powerful skill. He came with the light and pointed with one finger. The fire phoenix screeched in despair. Yi Hongyu still looked indifferent, as if she did not care about anything. She held the sword and then drew it. The feathers of the fire phoenix scattered, but she did not care at all. The hall was full of energy and wind. The fire phoenix suddenly disappeared, leaving only her body. She stabbed the middle-aged priest with her sword. It was an ordinary sword, but it was the most powerful one. It was like an arrow hitting a heavy leather, or a stone falling into a deep pond. There was a sound, there was an echo, there was chanting. The middle-aged priest's finger and her sword finally met in the air. The wind stopped and the dust settled. The divine hall of judgment was quiet again. Several golden threads burst out from Yi Hongyu's body and then floated down like real withered leaves. She held the virtual sword and stood in front of the middle-aged priest, expressionless. The divine robe of judgment was half open and rolled up to her waist, revealing her naked upper body. Blood dripped from her perfect curves. She was covered in blood and stood naked. She seemed to be in a mess, but she was actually very beautiful. It was a kind of divine beauty, holy beauty, pure beauty, but it was tempting. Seduction and holiness did not contradict each other, at least at this moment. Blood dripped from her body, fell to her feet, and flowed into the cracks in the stone floor. The crevices were gradually filled with blood, and then they began to glow like lines. In the sea of blood there was light. When the light shone, it was a confinement. The middle-aged priest's expression finally changed, because he was in the center of the confinement. I think I can write more tomorrow, right? I feel like I am recovering quickly. Ah. By the way, Yi Hongyu's upper body was naked, and she was covered in blood. I can refer to some oil paintings. Of course, if it was an Oriental woman, it would be a good movie. Chapter 1063. In tonight's battle, Yi Hongyu would first fight Zhao Nanhai, then the hierarch, and finally the middle-aged priest. It was an arrogant choice, even if she was the arrogant Yi Hongyu. Because the three of them were too powerful, so powerful that she had no confidence to defeat any one of them. Her arrogance seemed ridiculous and hopeless. But what kind of person was Yi Hongyu? How could she do such a ridiculous thing? She did not know the meaning of hopelessness. Then what was the purpose of her 3 consecutive attacks? Yes, from the beginning until now, her goal had never changed. She had never thought of running away. She had never thought of leaving the divine hall of judgment. Not only did she not run away, she even wanted to catch the middle-aged priest. She wanted to exchange the middle-aged priest's life for another one. Undoubtedly, it was an arrogant idea or even a gamble. But she did it because she did not care about her own life, because she wanted that life. Because she had the confinement. She did not have the right time for tonight's battle, because Hao Yin had abandoned her. She did not have the right people, because the Abbey Dean had abandoned her. But she had the geographical advantage. The geographical advantage was where her feet were standing. She was standing on a smooth stone floor. She was in the divine hall of judgment. She was the divine hall of judgment. Tonight, she turned the solemn divine hall into a confinement. The confinement was no longer the most powerful Taoism in the divine hall of judgment. It had become a real prison. The former great divine priest of judgment had used the confinement to lock the former great divine priest of light for over a decade. Tonight, she was going to imprison the middle-aged Taoist and suppress him. The middle-aged priest looked solemn. The natural stream magical finger disappeared. He waved his sleeves, and the purest and most authentic Taoism Shengong fell on the light screen. The light screen rose from the ground, stained with blood. It was the confinement itself. His sleeves were like hammers, smashing the air above the divine hall of judgment. But the light screen was not shaken at all. Seeing this, the middle-aged Taoist's expression became even more solemn. Zhao Nanhai and the hierarch looked even more terrible. They rushed over. They finally understood Yi Hongyu's plan. Naturally, they could not let her have her way. They had to break the confinement before it was formed. If she really locked the middle-aged priest in the confinement, the outcome of the night would be unpredictable. Xiong Chumo's chest and abdomen sunk in. Thunders came out slowly. The majestic force came from the sky and landed on him. Then it went out along with the thunders and bombarded the confinement. Zhao Nanhai followed closely behind. His expression was solemn and his palms were soft and gentle. Hao Yin's divine flame once again burned fiercely as if it was trying to melt the confinement formation at the bottom of the hall. Naturally, the middle-aged Taoist in the confinement formation would not wait to be killed. He looked at the night sky with a solemn expression. His hands that had retracted the natural stream magical finger changed into several shapes in front of him, fluttering like butterflies. 3 unimaginably powerful forces appeared in 3 different forms and landed on Yi Hongyu's body and the confinement array almost at the same time. Countless beams of light came and instantly lit up every corner of the divine hall of judgment. The confinement array was clearly illuminated. It was as if there were countless suns in the dark hall. When the light was at its peak, it was darkness that blinded everyone. Yi Hongyu, who was in the center of the light, and the other 3 people could no longer see anything. They could only sense their surroundings. The wounds on Yi Hongyu's naked body became more and more numerous. Her blood flowed faster and faster. She looked at the middle-aged priest in the confinement expressionlessly. Even though she could not see him, she still stared at him. The blood dripped onto the ground and flowed along the cracks, awakening the soul that had been hidden in the divine hall of judgment for countless years. The confinement array that was attacked by the 3 people did not break. Instead, it became even stronger. At a certain moment, a solemn shout seemed to ring out from the depths of the extremely bright light. The confinement array was finally formed. She finally succeeded in turning the divine hall of judgment into the confinement. She trapped the most powerful enemy and protected herself. Perhaps it was a kind of self-confinement, but she was willing to do it. At that moment, the middle-aged priest stopped the butterfly Sanzho and slowly raised his head. The light dimmed and he saw Yi Hongyu, who was covered in blood. Then 2 streams of blood flowed out from his eyes. In an instant, he was severely injured under the suppression of the confinement array. But he was still calm. So was Yi Hongyu. Her upper body was bare, and her beautiful curves were completely exposed to the night sky, to the moon and stars in the night sky, and to the people in the night hall, but her expression was very calm. She let go of the hilt of her sword. Since the beginning, she had used her Taoist sword twice and failed to hurt Xiong Chumo and the middle-aged priest. But now she did not need to use her sword anymore. Xiong Chumo and Zhao Nanhai stopped. Because the confinement array was formed. She could kill the middle-aged priest with a single thought. The middle-aged priest looked at Yi Hongyu quietly through the screen of light. He was silent for a long time. His expression was mixed with admiration, solemnity, and pity. "It's meaningless," he said. Yi Hongyu said, "Xiong Chumo and Zhao Nanhai are just 2 dogs. It's meaningless to take their lives. But uncle, you are different. The Abbey Dean wants you alive." The middle-aged priest looked at her and said with pity, "Even so, it's too late now. Long Qing should have taken action in the kingdom of Song. Even if the Abbey Dean wants me alive, it's meaningless." Hearing this, Yi Hongyu was silent. "And you can't trap me. The middle-aged priest put his hand into his chest and sighed. So, it's meaningless? Yi Hongyu looked at his hand and raised her eyebrows. She said, you can't break the confinement? When Wei Guangming betrayed Peach Mountain, he said, I have a bright heart. How can the confinement trap me? I'm not as powerful as the Elder of Light. Your confinement is more powerful than the previous one. But it still can't trap me. When the middle-aged priest's hand reappeared, there was a book in his hand. No one knew what the book was made of. It was not crushed by the collision of auras in such a horrifying battle. It was hard to tell if it was new or old, but it gave off a mysterious aura. Looking at the book in his hand, the middle-aged priest hesitated and felt regretful. Yi Hongyu vaguely guessed the origin of the book. Her expression changed suddenly. After staying in the confinement for a long time, I returned to nature. The middle-aged priest finally made up his mind and recited slowly. As he recited, the book in his hand slowly turned to a page. The first page of the book was flipped open, and the page was instantly burned to ashes. A tremendous power, which was very similar to the power of Tianqi, burst out from the disappearing page and bombarded the confinement formation. However, it was even more real than Tianqi's. With a loud bang, the confinement trembled slightly. Looking at the scene and sensing the magical power in the book, Yi Hongyu knew that her guess was right. Her expression changed and she said coldly, how dare you use the tomes of arcane as a weapon? Yes, the book in the middle-aged priest's hand was the tomes of arcane. The arcane tome of the fall. One page fell and the world was shocked. Not to mention the confinement. Yi Hongyu spread her arms. The divine robe of judgment and her black hair danced wildly in the wind. She was going to use the confinement of the divine hall of judgment to fight against the tomes of arcane. The middle-aged priest's expression was very serious. He realized that one page of the tomes of arcane was not enough to break the confinement. So the tomes of arcane continued to burn. The pages of the arcane tome of the fall fell to ash one by one. It was as if an endless amount of the most primitive power was released and attacked the night hall in all directions. The middle-aged priest looked at the arcane tome of the fall in his hand. He looked more and more pained. Who could bear to destroy the tomes of arcane with their own hands? The battle between the confinement and the tomes of arcane continued. The pages of the arcane tome of the fall were burning. The divine hall of judgment kept shaking. Countless cracks appeared on the stone walls and pebbles fell, as if an earthquake was about to happen. The battle had entered the most horrifying moment. The people on Peach Mountain were finally awakened by the hierarch Tianqi and the huge commotion. Tens of thousands of divine priests and deacons stood on the peaks and in front of the Taoist temples. They looked at the black and solemn temple on the edge of the cliff and watched it totter under the night sky. Their faces were extremely pale. They were panic-stricken and speechless. They were confused and did not know what to do. With a loud bang, the southeast corner of the divine hall of judgment collapsed. Countless pebbles shot up. Many peach branches were broken. Countless divine priests and deacons knelt down in tears. They did not dare to raise their heads or make a sound. The divine hall of judgment was filled with smoke and dust. Xiong Chumo stood outside the battlefield with a complicated expression. This was the battle between the arcane tome of the fall and the divine hall of judgment. It was a microcosm of the battle between Haotian and Taoism. Even with his power, it was difficult for him to join the battle. It seemed to be a long time, but in fact it was very short. The arcane tome of the fall burned half of its pages in the hands of the middle-aged priest. Finally, the confinement was broken. The divine hall of judgment seemed to collapse the next moment. Yi Hongyu was forced back to the seat of heavenly black jade by the power of the arcane tome. Her face was pale, but her expression was still indifferent. The divine hall of judgment was silent for a long time. The middle-aged priest, Xiong Chumo, and Zhao Nanhai did not say a word. They looked at the woman covered in blood beside the seat of heavenly black jade with respect and fear. Almost just a little bit more. Facing such a powerful team of Taoism, the young great divine priest of judgment was so close to turning the situation around and even leading the whole situation into her thoughts. If the middle-aged priest did not have the arcane tome of the fall, if he did not follow the Abbey Dean's order and use the arcane tome as a weapon of Taoism, Yi Hongyu might have won. Now she was defeated, really defeated. But facing such a powerful enemy, she forced the opponent to use all his trump cards and destroyed half of the arcane tome. She had the right to be proud and respected. Unfortunately, she still could not win. Yi Hongyu's face was pale, not because she was seriously injured, not because she was afraid of the coming death, but because she knew that if she lost, Yi Su would die. Her goal tonight was to capture the middle-aged Taoist and use him to exchange for Yi Su's life. The middle-aged Taoist said that it was meaningless, but she still had to do it. Because Yi Su, her elder brother, was the only meaning of her life since many years ago. The middle-aged priest put the arcane tome of the fall back into his arms with a pious look. Then he looked at Yi Hongyu and said sincerely, "You are very beautiful and powerful." Yi Hongyu said emotionlessly, "I know." The middle-aged priest looked at her and saw the stubbornness in her heart. It was like seeing the little girl who liked to climb trees and bully Chin Pippi in the abbey. He felt pity for her. "Unfortunately, you have to die." A corner of the divine hall of judgment collapsed. Yi Hongyu was seriously injured. She had no other choice. The middle-aged priest, Xiong Chumo and Zhao Nanhai were still looking at her, standing in three corners. If she lost, she had to die because Taoism did not spare her a way out. She stood beside the seat of heavenly black jade. Behind her was the endless abyss. It might be a way out, but it was not a way out. At this moment she suddenly laughed. Her laughter was full of anger and unwillingness. She seemed to be a bit crazy. She and Yi Su had worked hard for Taoism for many years, but they would die in the end. She could not accept it. She tried her best, but she could not change it. But would she accept her fate? No. People like her and Ning Ke might seem to be devout believers such as Hao Yin and the Academy. But in fact they would only believe in themselves. This was something that even Hao Yin and the headmaster of the Academy could not detect. Her laughter was cold, very cold. It was like a sharp Taoist sword that had been frozen by the snow sea for thousands of years. Then it was pulled out and echoed in the divine hall of judgment, as if it was slashing everywhere. The next moment she stopped laughing. She said, "I want to live." Xiong Chumo looked at her and said mockingly, "Or you can try begging me." Yi Hongyu ignored him. She repeated calmly, "I want to live." The middle-aged priest said, "You can't live." The Abbey Dean had decided to kill Yi Su and destroy the new stream. Then she had to die. Especially after tonight, if she lived, Xiong Chumo would die and Taoism would sink into the sea of fire. Yi Hongyu said, "I will live." She said it calmly. She was not begging or pleading. She was just informing the Abbey Dean. She told the powerful people and the Abbey Dean that she would live as long as she wanted. Fresh blood flowed on her naked body, flowing through her exquisite collarbone, wonderful breasts, and into her charming navel. It was as if she had walked through a life without regrets on her perfect body. "I didn't leave because I wanted to do something. But now it seems that I failed. Yi Su will probably die. So I will leave. Do you think you can stop me?" She looked at the middle-aged priest and said indifferently, "Half of the arcane tome is not enough to kill me." The middle-aged priest frowned. He felt something was wrong. Xiong Chumo looked at her and asked, "How can you leave?" He pointed at the cliff behind her and said mockingly, "Ning Ke and Hao Yin jumped down. Or do you want to jump down? Do you think you can survive?" The cliff of Peach Mountain was so high that it reached the clouds. The most terrifying thing was the tactical array hidden inside and the unimaginable dangers at the bottom of the abyss. Even Wei Guangming did not dare to think about leaving like this. Ning Ke didn't die because Hao Yin jumped down with him. No matter how powerful Yi Hongyu was, she was not Hao Yin. If she jumped down from here, she would definitely die. It was quiet in the divine hall of judgment. The snow on the terrace reflected the moon. It was beautiful. Yi Hongyu looked at Xiong Chumo and smiled. She turned to the terrace. Blood flowed all the way. The snow melted when it touched the blood on her bare feet. She came to the terrace and leaned against the railing for a while. Then she jumped down. Chapter 1064. The moonlight was still the same, the wind was no more, and the snow was still there. The bloodstains on the snow were clear and soul-stirring. The divine hall of judgment was dead silent, except for the occasional sound of rocks falling off. The middle-aged priest walked to the balcony, followed by Xiong Chumo and Zhao Nanhai. The three of them looked at the bottomless abyss under the railings, the mist under the moonlight, and the old trees on the precipice. They remained silent for a long time. Then they left without talking or looking at each other. Ning Ke jumped, Hao Yin jumped, and so did Yi Hongyu tonight. Ning Ke and Hao Yin could survive, but she could not. Since death was the only ending, there was no need to care about it anymore. She was the great divine priest of judgment, and her death would cause a lot of trouble. Taoism had many things to deal with. Xiong Chumo had to start preparing to suppress the anger of the divine hall of judgment, Zhao Nanhai had to help stabilize the situation on Peach Mountain, and the middle-aged priest had to gather the will of Taoism. More importantly, with the battle tonight and Yi Hongyu's death, Taoism would start to destroy the new stream, and the war with the Tang and the Academy would officially begin. After the three of them left, the heavily damaged Divine Hall became lonely again. Naturally, someone would be sent to the bottom of the precipice to confirm Yi Hongyu's death and search for her body. However, even if she could return to the Divine Hall of Judgment on that day, this solemn Divine Hall would not be able to welcome its master back. The night was dark and the moon was hidden behind the thick clouds. The crisscrossing streams, the stone bridges and the cold-resistant wildflowers were all swallowed by the darkness. It was very cold this year. The fields outside of Yangzhou City were frozen solid. In the dead of night there was a muffled sound. Someone fell from the top of the city wall and smashed heavily into the ground, creating several cracks in the frozen ground. The person's leg bones immediately broke, but under such pain he did not make a sound. Wang Jinglu frowned. Even the dark night could not hide the paleness on his face. Countless beads of sweat came out of his body and soaked him. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and used his hands as his feet to crawl forward with difficulty. Only when he entered a bush and confirmed that he wouldn't be easily discovered did he let out a sigh of relief. At this moment, there was another sound of something falling on the ground in front of the city wall. He pulled the bushes aside and saw a man lying on the ground. The man was covered with blood. Obviously he was already dead. The sound of hurried footsteps came from the top of the city wall, and then dozens of torches were lit. In an instant, the pitch-black night was driven away, and the top and bottom of the city wall were illuminated as if it was daytime. The face of the man lying motionless on the ground was also illuminated by the torch. His face was covered in blood, but his facial features were barely discernible. Wang Jinglu's body trembled slightly, and the hand holding the branch trembled slightly. His face became even paler because he knew the man. To be precise, he was very familiar with the man. He was very familiar with him. In the past few years, Wang Jinglu had represented the imperial court and secretly contacted the young people who were loyal to the Tang in Yangzhou City. He had made a lot of progress and the young man who died was one of them. The top of Yangzhou City wall became noisy. There were shouts and sounds of weapons clashing. Wang Jinglu looked up with difficulty. He knew that the young people who were loyal to Chang and were being chased by the powerhouses of the Divine Hall. He clenched his fists tighter, but he could not do anything. He could not help but feel hopeless. More people fell, crashing heavily into the frozen field. Mud and blood splattered everywhere. Following that, more and more people fell, dying one after another. His pale face was full of despair and pain. His eyes were full of regret. He regretted not realizing that his plan had been completely grasped by the Divine Hall. He regretted not predicting the Divine Hall's sudden attack. He regretted letting these young people die. The people who died tonight were his helpers and the warlords. They were all young people from Qinghe County. In Ning Kei's words, they were the real hope. However, no matter how tough the young people's bones were, they were still broken. Wang Jinglu's eyes turned red. He bit his lips and began to bleed. He stared at the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall at the top of Yangzhou City wall. He looked at the figures illuminated by the torches. His body trembled in pain. He was like a wounded stray dog, but he did not dare to mourn. He turned around and crawled on the ground like a dog. He crawled into the deepest part of the night. He bled as he crawled. He had to leave Qinghe County alive. He wanted to tell the Tang army on the other side of the Verdant Canyon what had happened tonight. He wanted to tell Ning Kei that the Academy's plan had failed. He wanted to tell Chang and that the war had begun. Ning Kei did not expect that the West Hill Divine Palace would suddenly make a move under such circumstances. Their cause and the young people of Qinghe County had suffered unimaginable losses. But I will be back. On the day I return, the iron hooves will trample this difficult and cold field. Torches will be placed all over the manors by the Fuchin River. The souls of the young people who died will receive the grandest sacrifice. Wang Jinglu crawled into the dark night, away from the light of the torches in Yangzhou City. Snow suddenly fell on the dead young people. It also fell on him who was like a dog. The straightest street in Yangzhou City was brightly illuminated by the lights. The sacred sedan moved slowly in the middle of the street. A dozen handmaidens beside the sedan kept sprinkling flower petals into the night sky. The flower petals mixed with the falling snow and fell together, pure and holy. The wind blew and lifted the veil in front of the sedan, revealing Hengmu Liren's childish face. Thousands of people of Yangzhou knelt down on both sides of the street. The leaders of the warlords of Qinghe County also knelt on the ground. No one dared to look at his face. Tonight in the city of Yangzhou, people were killed everywhere. Blood poured into the cracks of the flagstones and flowed into the clear Fuchin River. It was the bloodiest night since the rebellion years ago. Many young people who were loyal to Chang'an died tonight. As for those who were not discovered by the divine halls, they would be much quieter after witnessing such a bloody scene. Hengmu Liren only attacked once tonight. A dozen powerful figures from the Imperial Center administration of the Tang were all killed. His hands were stained with blood. His will even made Qinghe County bleed. But his expression was still so calm, naive and delightful. He was not the great divine priest of Westhill, but he was as powerful and dignified as the great divine priest of Westhill. He was the gift from Haotian to the human world. He considered himself as the spokesperson of Haotian. He sat in the sacred sedan and moved forward slowly in the scattered flowers and snow. He enjoyed the respect and love of mortals. He liked this feeling very much. The war with the Tang Empire had finally begun. Could Ning Ke still sit in Chang'an City peacefully? Ning Ke, when will you come out? When will you come to see me? Please come and fight with me. Please come and be killed by me. The light from the fire illuminated the night snow, making it look like white powder, like willow catkins in spring. Hengmu Liren looked through the wind and snow, across the verdant canyon and fell on Chang'an. He smiled and thought to himself. The central plains were covered with snow. The Peach Mountain and the city of Yangzhou were all covered with thin or thick snow. Soon the Song would have a snowfall as well, which would be remembered in history. But before that, the snow suddenly stopped on the grassland. The clouds dispersed and the snow disappeared, revealing the bright moon. To the north of the city of Wei, thousands of tents were being dismantled. Countless livestock were being driven away. The warriors of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were saddling their horses. Tens of thousands of elite cavalrymen were about to set off. It was a magnificent scene. But no sound could be heard. Except for the livestock's restless cries, the atmosphere was depressing. As the most powerful power in the north of the continent, the nobles and citizens of the Golden Tribe Royal Court had every right to be proud of themselves for their successive victories against the Tang. But it was different this time. Tonight, the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court would move south. Moving south meant invading south. It meant that the final battle was about to begin. It meant that they would have to fight to the death against the Tang that had ruled the world for thousands of years. Even the proudest warriors of the Golden Tribe started to feel nervous. The first to leave the city of Wei was an ordinary-looking motorcade. It consisted of more than a dozen large carriages. There were not many people and they did not carry much supplies. So they moved easily. But for the Golden Tribe Royal Court, this was the most important motorcade. 13 high priests from the grassland were sitting in their own carriages. The skull necklaces on their chests were as white as pure jade under the moonlight coming through the window. The national master wore a string of ordinary wooden beads, just like his ordinary clothes and his ordinary face. He looked at the bright moon outside the window and smiled calmly. No one knew what he was thinking. For the cultivation world of the Central Plains, he was an uncivilized barbarian. Even if he led the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the embrace of Haotian, he and the priests were still wandering outside the orthodox cultivation world. However, this did not affect his strength, nor did it affect his emotions. He yearned for the bright moon. He wanted to go to the south and experience the thoughts of the people of the Central Plains. He wanted to go to Chang'an and the academy. But of course he did not want to come back. Young Ada was also looking at the moon. The air was washed by the wind and snow for several days. It was very clean. The grassland was very quiet at night, so the moon looked extra round and big. Different from the national master, Ada did not think too much. He only felt that the moon was a bit dazzling. He squinted his eyes and his childish face was full of annoyance. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was mobilized. More than 100,000 cavalries were about to go south. Chanyu was determined and moved quickly. But Ada was still not satisfied. He was in a hurry to go south. He wanted to kill the Tang general named Hua Ying. He wanted to crush the last cavalries of the Tang army. From Xiangwan Plain to Hebei Prefecture, he wanted to conquer all the places with water and grass. During this process, he would wait for the arrival of the Iron Arrow and Yu Lian together with the people in the motorcade. He wanted to break the arrow and kill the person. Why? Because he wanted to do it. He wanted to take revenge on the Tang man named Ning Quebec. He wanted to defeat the legendary academy. He thought that since he wanted to do so, it must be the will of Tingri Heaven. It was not snowing in the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The confrontation on the square had been going on for a long time. Thousands of followers of the new stream, Taoist priests and cavalries of the Kingdom of Song looked at each other nervously. They were all exhausted. Torches were lit on the high platform, lighting up the corner. Yisu sat behind the table and pondered over the analysis of morality and justice. Chen Pipi knelt beside him and said nothing. Tang Xiaotang and a dozen disciples of the Sword Garret also stood in front of the high platform in silence. Facing the attack of the Divine Hall, they did not know how long they could hold on. They could not leave, so they could only wait. Xiaoyu, the girl from the South Sea, looked terrible. She represented the attitude of Taoism. However, at the most critical moment of the day, the bell rang in the Taoist hall. She had to stop and wait. Wait. Why wait? Would Haoyin show mercy to these traitors? Could Ning Ke really persuade the Abbey Dean to let go of Yi Su and the followers of the new stream? Wait for what? No one knew what they were waiting for. Were they waiting for the order to kill or the arrival of peace? Those who knew about the peace talks with the Divine Halls of West Hill also felt that it was too long to wait. Only Long Qing knew what the Divine Halls of West Hill were waiting for. They were not waiting for the Abbey Dean to be persuaded or not. They were not waiting for the final result of the peace talks. They were not waiting for Haoyin's order. They were waiting for someone's death. In other words, the news of death. The news of Yi Hongyu's death. Her death was the beginning of the war. As long as the young great divine priest of judgment was alive, Taoism could not do anything to Yi Su. Long Qing knew it, but he did not care. Because he knew that it was inevitable. Whether it was tonight or tomorrow morning, her death would come. So he still chopped firewood as he did in the daytime. He picked up the branches and piled them in the middle of the yard. He piled them carefully as if he was making a delicate handicraft. Thousands of people were confronting each other outside the wall. He was piling firewood on the other side of the wall. Because he had plenty of time, he chopped a lot of firewood. Now he could even pile all the firewood wet with snow at the bottom and only put dry, flammable and perfectly shaped firewood on the top. The dry firewood had been piled up to a radius of dozens of feet. It was so dense that it looked like the tomb of a king. Or it could be the tomb of a sage. At the top of the dry firewood, there were 2 stakes inserted horizontally and vertically. They looked like a person or a cross. There was a rope hanging on the stakes. The rope and the stakes were used to tie people up. The firewood was used to burn people. Time passed slowly. The night was fading and the sky was getting brighter. On the other side of the wall, the chanting of the followers of the new stream could be heard. The orderly chanting could drive away fatigue and, more importantly, fear. Long Qing listened to the orderly chanting outside the wall and repeated it softly. The tone was very interesting, as if they were singing. He did not stop picking firewood. He looked serious and calm. The silver mask was tied around his waist. He did not wear it. The scar on his face did not fade. Strangely, the scar was no longer horrible and ugly. The gray eyes on his beautiful face were particularly charming. Listening to the chanting coming from outside the wall, Long Qing slowly repeated it. He placed the thin firewood on the pile and repeated these actions under the increasingly bright sky. Then he suddenly stopped. "We are the path, the truth and the life." He raised his head and looked over the wall to the east. He did not know whether it was the sunrise or some other building. He murmured and repeated it thoughtfully. This was the capital of the kingdom of Song. It was not famous on the mainland and could not be compared with Lingang, let alone Chang'an. But this city was of great significance to Taoism. It was the oldest Taoist temple on the mainland and had the longest history. Many great divine priests had been dedicated to the divine halls of West Hill. The people in the Jishou Abbey had an inseparable relationship with this place. The Abbey Dean Chen Mao was also from this place. The kingdom of Song was one of the origins of Taoism and the most conservative place. Yi Su chose this place to spread the new stream and make it the base camp of the new stream. This must be the reason why he chose this place to spread the new stream. He wanted to move forward in the most dangerous place and see the light in the abyss. While he was thinking, a bell suddenly rang from afar. It should be the Taoist temple of the kingdom of Song. Long Qing's expression froze. When he saw the white smoke rising from the Taoist temple, he was sure that the news had arrived. The solemn ringing of the bell and the wisp of white smoke rising into the clouds could only mean one thing. A great divine priest of the divine halls of West Hill had left the human world and returned to the divine kingdom of Haotian. Yi Hongyu was dead. The youngest great divine priest of judgment in history was dead. Long Qing stood behind the wall and watched the white smoke gradually dissipate into the sky. He thought of the dead woman and could not help but feel a lot of emotions. He was silent for a long time. They were both from the Revelation Institute and worked together in the judicial department. He was the second priest and she was the Grand Master. He was the divine son of West Hill and she was the peerless Tao addict. He had never been as good as her. When he chose to betray Taoism for power and became a lonely ghost, she had already sat on the seat of heavenly black jade, the seat of heavenly black jade that he could never forget. He was always a loser in front of Yi Hongyu, just like he was in front of Ning Quebec. When he was at the peak of his power, he subconsciously felt inferior in front of Yi Hongyu and even instinctively feared her. That was why he stabbed Lu Qinjia to death in front of her in the illusion of climbing the mountain in the academy. He regarded her and Yi Su as the biggest inner demons in his cultivation. Today she finally died. Long Qing did not feel happy at all. Instead he felt empty. Maybe it was because she did not die in his hands. He could never make up for this regret. Was a pity? Fortunately, Yi Su was still alive and he still had a chance to be burned to death by his own hands. The solemn bell rang from the Taoist temple to the square and into the ears of thousands of followers of the new stream and divine priests and deacons. It washed away their fatigue and tension and drew their attention to the Taoist temple. There was a white smoke rising from the temple. It was holy and pure. There was dead silence. As devout followers of Hao Yin, they knew what it meant. The followers of the new stream, the divine priests and deacons of the divine hall, and the cavalrymen of the imperial court of the kingdom of Song were all silent because of the white smoke. They could not get over the shock for a long time. If it were any other time, they would have knelt down in front of the white smoke to express their sorrow and nostalgia. But now the white smoke was a signal of war. Xiaoyu raised the Taoist sword in her hand and pointed it at the people on the high platform. Behind her, dozens of Taoist powerhouses and more divine priests and deacons walked forward slowly. More and more cavalrymen of the kingdom of Song poured out from the streets and alleys around the square. The butcher's knife had been raised. The helpless followers of the new stream huddled together in fear and retreated backward. The threat of death woke them up from the shock brought by the white smoke. Yi Su sat behind the desk with his right hand on the scroll. He tilted his head and looked at the white smoke that had yet to dissipate. He was silent for a long time. The approaching enemies and the approaching death could not make him look away. His sister was dead because he was dead. In the past 10 years, he was harsh and even cruel to her because of Chin Pippi and the things that happened in the past. But she still treated him like she was when they were young. She was the one who treated him the best in the world. That person was gone. Yi Su was silent and speechless. You can go now. After a long time he said, my teacher wants me to die, so I will die. You are alive. That's good. Yes, it was better to be alive than dead. Looking at the white smoke, he thought sadly. Chapter 1065. Chin Pippi knelt beside Yi Su and stared at the white smoke. He seemed to be in pain. For him, Yi Hongyu's death meant many things. His childhood memories and life in the abbey had come to an abrupt end. He no longer had a companion to share with. It also meant the tragedy of a father and son falling out with each other. It's not the end. After a moment of silence, he said, as long as we are alive, everything is possible. Then why should we leave? As he spoke, the powerhouses from the divine halls of West Hill had already arrived. No matter how pious the followers of the new stream were, they could not slow them down. They would only shed blood. Chin Pippi stood behind Yi Su and began to pack up. He was a wastrel whose ocean of chi and mountain of snow had been destroyed. He could not participate in the battle, but he looked calm and confident. This had happened many times since they left Lincoln. They always managed to break through the blockade of the divine halls of West Hill. He believed that today would not be an exception, even if the white smoke had already risen. Because he believed that she could protect his senior brother. Tang Xiaotang stood in front of him and Yi Su. The disciples of the sword Garrett were fighting against the powerhouses from Taoism. Blood spilled from time to time. She stood in front of Yi Su and Chin Pippi and did not go anywhere else. She held the iron cudgel in her hand. Whenever someone came, she would hit them with the iron cudgel. With a thundering sound, the enemy would be sent flying with blood spurting out. She was not a man. But when she was the pass, no one could pass it either. Looking at the girl from the Devil's Doctrine who was wearing thin cotton clothes and had her hair tied up in ponytails like a young girl, Xiaoyu's eyes were filled with hostility. But more than that, she was shocked and puzzled. Her hostility towards Tang Xiaotang was understandable. But she could not understand how Tang Xiaotang managed to survive until now. She had been wandering for thousands of miles, and the new stream had been hunted down by Taoism. She only had one powerhouse to rely on, Tang Xiaotang. Where did all the wounds she had suffered go? How much power did she have in her small body? Tang Xiaotang was indeed exhausted. In the days after they left Lincoln, she led them to break through the 4 lines of defense of the divine halls of West Hill. She fought 21 battles and killed 371 powerhouses of the divine halls. She was wounded 14 times. No matter how dangerous the battle was, she was always the leader. No matter how serious her wounds were, she was always bleeding. She persevered and did not collapse. She took Yi Su and Qin Pipi, the two brothers whose ocean of qi and mountain of snow were both destroyed, across the vast mountains and thousands of miles to the capital of Song Kingdom. She was exhausted, she was on the verge of collapsing, but she still held the iron rod in her hand and beat people. She stood below the stage and sang this beautiful fight, and no one could take a step forward. The swords were broken, the men were sent flying, and the horses were in a mess. A few Song cavalrymen who took advantage of the chaos to attack the high platform from the side were swept to the ground by Tang Xiaotang. With a heavy thud, they fell to the ground along with their horses. Xiaoyu raised her eyebrows and her eyes suddenly brightened. Her cyan robe fluttered in the morning light. The Taoist sword in her hand became a straight line, piercing through the morning wind and coldness, and instantly came to Tang Xiaotang. Cultivator's swords were all flying swords, but her sword did not leave her hand. Her wrist and elbow were also part of the line. From Kuharan to Liu Bai, the history of sword Taoism had changed. A real swordsman would never let his sword leave his hand easily, especially when facing a really strong enemy. The cold edge of the sword reflected the snow on the square and pierced Tang Xiaotang's eyes. Tang Xiaotang did not close her eyes. She did not even blink. She stared at the Taoist sword that seemed to carry the smell of salty sea wind. She felt the hidden meaning of the sea, rain and wind, and silently waved the rod. Facing Xiaoyu, who was in the knowing destiny state, she did not hold back. Her petite body turned into a burning stone. She used the Enlightenment Doctrine's method to squeeze every bit of strength out of her body and put it all into the iron rod. The iron rod in her hand was originally a knife, a sacred object of the Devil's Doctrine, the giant blood knife. In the Battle of Chang'an, Yulian used this knife to cut off the Abbey Dean's rainbow, and the blood knife was melted into an iron rod. She joined the academy and became Yulian's disciple, becoming the eldest sister of the third generation of the academy. Since then she had always held this iron rod in her hand. Although it looked like an iron rod, it was still a knife in essence, and the knife intent was hidden in it. She once dug the heaven steps on the precipice of the back mountain, and smashed the chessboard. During the Right to Light, she once killed the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill on the Peach Mountain, and no one dared to move. She also once cut cabbage in a shabby house. At this moment she waved the iron rod with all her strength again. Even the sea, rain and wind brought by Xiaoyu's Taoist sword were suddenly broken. Thousands of raindrops disappeared, and the soft wind was cut into countless pieces. The Taoist sword slightly tilted and stabbed Tang Xiaotang's left shoulder, and then sharply flicked up. Tang Xiaotang's beautiful face remained unchanged, and the iron rod continued to move forward. Xiaoyu let out a muffled groan, and a trace of fear flashed in her eyes. She quickly retreated, and the Taoist sword in her hand was bent out of shape. Her pale face was covered with an abnormal flush, and blood was accumulating in her throat. She was defeated and injured in the moment they met. The sword was bent but not broken. The horrifying power flowed up the sword and fell on Xiaoyu's body. She was immediately blown away, passing through the crowd and falling backward. Tang Xiaotang did not stop. She stomped on the ground and crushed 17 black bricks around her. She suddenly flew up and chased after Xiaoyu like a flying stone. The iron rod in her hand was aimed at Xiaoyu's chest. Seeing this scene, many divine priests and deacons were shocked. Their faces were filled with fear, and they all rushed towards the small fishing village. For a time, the crowded sea of people in the square unexpectedly arched up several tides. Xiaoyu was Zhao Nanhai's daughter and the most trusted subordinate of the Abbey Dean. She had a special status and no one dared to let her get hurt. Countless Taoist swords flew up, trying to stop Tang Xiaotang. Tang Xiaotang's expression did not change. She stared at the flying Taoist girl in front of her, and let the flying swords hit her. It seemed that she only wanted to smash the girl to death with one strike. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless sharp sounds were heard in the air. In an instant, at least 7 flying swords fell on her and cut her ordinary clothes. But no blood fell. As the saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, her body had been tempered by the qi of heaven and earth to be as hard as steel. No matter how sharp the Taoist swords were, they could only cut her skin and leave some light wounds. The sword intent entered her body and made her lips bleed, but it could not stop her. She raised the iron rod and was about to burn the sky. The iron rod fell down and was about to smash Xiaoyu to death. Xiaoyu fell to the ground. Her face was pale and bloodless. Her previous flush had been driven away by the danger, but there was not much fear in her eyes. Tang Xiaotang looked calm. She seemed to have guessed that something else was about to happen. Indeed, something strange happened. A black peach blossom suddenly bloomed in the air above the square. The black peach blossom had no substance. It was formed purely by the qi of heaven and earth. It was extremely beautiful but not charming. Instead, it was filled with killing intent. The black petals gave off a sense of annihilation, which made it look extremely powerful. The appearance of the black peach blossom attracted everyone's attention. Tang Xiaotang's eyes were all fixed on it, because it was blooming right in front of her. She was not surprised. She suddenly smashed down with the rod. From yesterday to this morning, Taoism had shown a resolute attitude. As the white smoke rose, the war officially began. Peace could not return to the human world, and Taoism was determined to win. The South Sea Girl in the Upper Knowing Destiny State, the powerhouses of Taoism, and the cavalry of the Kingdom of Song seemed powerful. But how could they be determined to win? Tang Xiaotang knew that there must be a real powerhouse of the West Hill Divine Palace watching from the side. She could even guess who that person was. However, a day and a night had passed and that person still did not show up. This made her feel more and more uneasy. She pretended to kill Xiaoyu to force that person to show up. All her attention was not on Xiaoyu. She was waiting for the moment when the black peach blossom bloomed. There was a loud bang. The black iron rod accurately and violently smashed into the black peach blossom. The shapeless black peach blossoms dissipated, instantly turning into ownerless qi of heaven and earth, dispersing into the surroundings of the square like clouds and steam. Tang Xiaotang's face turned pale and she spat out a mouthful of blood. The moment the iron rod hit the black peach blossom, she knew that she was wrong. That was why she lost. That person was not hiding and preparing for the final blow. He was so powerful that he did not need to wait for an opportunity. He just waited quietly and then appeared to defeat everyone. Tang Xiaotang landed on the ground and crushed the bricks. Her right arm trembled slightly as she looked at a wall. Her chest rose and fell slightly. Her two black ponytails swayed behind her. Her face was very pale and it was obvious that she was seriously injured. More than 10 divine priests and deacons attacked Tang Xiaotang. Xiaoyu rushed forward. The bent Taoist sword suddenly straightened and stabbed at her eyes again. No one could recover from such a serious injury in such a short period of time. This was the best chance to kill Tang Xiaotang. At this most dangerous moment, Tang Xiaotang took a deep breath. She inhaled all the cold wind on the square into her stomach. The air was burning rapidly in her lungs. His somewhat gloomy eyes suddenly brightened up. Those injuries seemed to be healed in an instant. The iron rod broke through the wind and hit the sword in Xiaoyu's hand. With a clear sound, the Taoist sword finally broke. But the iron rod was still as firm as before. Xiaoyu grunted and stepped back. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. She couldn't understand what the body of this woman from the devil's doctrine was made of. How could she recover in such a short time after suffering such a serious injury? Tang Xiaotang killed a deacon in black who attacked her from behind with her rod. She walked towards the wall. Those who encountered her had their tendons broken and their bones broken. No one could stop her. No one could stop her if she wanted to go there. Along the way, the iron rod killed countless people. Blood fell from the sky and moistened the earth. She walked between the sky and the earth alone. She looked very lonely. She was surrounded by enemies and had no helpers. She only had herself. But that was enough. She didn't seem to be injured at all. No matter how horrible the black peach blossom was, it didn't hurt her at all. It seemed that no one in the world could hurt her. Seeing this scene, the powerhouses of Taoism and the cavalrymen of Song were shocked and silent. At this moment, several shrill screams came from afar. With a puff, an arrow shot into Tang Xiaotang's left chest. The arrow didn't enter her body. The sharp arrowhead pierced through her skin. Blood seeped out and dyed her clothes red. But at least it meant something, or at least it was a comfort. The desperate divine priests and deacons cheered up. They thought that there was no one who couldn't be hurt. This fact woke them up and they became very excited. She can't make it. Her devil skill is ineffective. Kill her. In the morning, the divine priests and deacons and the cavalrymen of Song were everywhere on the square. People seemed to have gone crazy. Tang Xiaotang turned a deaf ear to them. She held the iron rod and continued to walk toward the wall. She didn't know how many more people fell in front of her, but she finally arrived in front of the courtyard wall. The wall collapsed silently. The bricks fell on the ground like withered leaves falling on the snow. There was no sound. It was so quiet that it made people's hearts palpitate just like that figure. Long Qing stood at the gap of the wall and looked at her quietly. A shrill sound came from afar. The earth began to shake slightly. All the city gates opened at the same time. Thousands of papal cavalrymen of West Hill Divine Palace who were hiding in the forest on the outskirts of the city rushed in. Tang Xiaotang heard it and knew it. But she just looked at the gap of the collapsed wall and the man standing there. She looked at the scar on his face attentively. She knew that as long as she killed this man, it would be meaningless no matter how many papal cavalrymen of West Hill Divine Palace came. If she couldn't kill him, then she and the people she cared about would die. Silence. The square suddenly became very quiet. Everyone was looking at them, including Qin Pipi and Yisu. Then he saw the pile of firewood behind the wall. The firewood had been piled up to the height of a person. It was densely packed and neat. The cross on it seemed to be made by a skilled carpenter. Qin Pipi's face turned pale. Yisu was silent as if he had seen his fate. Long Qing walked out of the gap and looked at Tang Xiaotang. He said, "You are stronger than I thought." Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said, "You are stronger than everyone thought." All of a sudden, a bright sword light flashed. A disciple of the sword Garrett recognized Long Qing. Thinking that it was this man who destroyed the sword Garrett and Lu Yiqing who was forced to death by this man in the powerhouses of Haoyan Taoism, his blood surged and he quietly stabbed out with his sword. This sword was very decisive and carried the belief that he would die, so it was very powerful. Long Qing's expression did not change. He brushed his right hand across his chest. Like those people who performed magic in the fragrance workshop in Chang'an, a black peach blossom appeared in his hand. He held it in front of the sword light. This black peach blossom was not condensed by the qi of heaven and earth. It had a real shape and seemed to be made of cheap silk. The sword stabbed into the black peach blossom and the peach petals fell off. But the sword was like a flower that had been weathered by wind and frost. It was covered with rust as if it had been stored for thousands of years. The sword rusted and broke. The aura of the disciple of the sword Garrett suddenly weakened. His angry face was covered with many spots as if he had aged a lot. He fell to the ground and died. Looking at this scene, Tang Xiaotang's eyes narrowed as cold as willow leaves. She found that Long Qing was not the same as before. The evil gray eyes cultivation method had reached the advanced level. Even without looking at each other, he could seize other cultivators' essence and cultivation. He was so powerful that it was terrifying. The peak of knowing destiny state did not mean much to Long Qing at this moment. Tang Xiaotang's expression was solemn, but she was still not afraid. Because she was also a powerhouse who could ignore the difference in cultivation states. As long as it was not beyond the 5 states, she could try to defeat him. Long Qing said expressionlessly, "Please?" Tang Xiaotang took a breath and her chest rose high. She had inhaled half of the cold wind on the square. Now she inhaled all the remaining cold wind into her body, and even the snow clouds high in the sky seemed to be sucking them down. The air in her body burned and turned into endless power. She slightly bent her knees. Years ago in the back of the mountain of the academy, she was forced by Yu Lian to jump from the waterfall. Before jumping she had to bend her knees. She jumped up. But this time she did not jump down from the waterfall but into the sky. With a bang, countless green bricks broke, and the ones in the middle had already been smashed into powder. Dust flew in front of the courtyard wall and many people were blinded. Tang Xiaotang disappeared. No one knew where she went. Long Qing did not close his eyes. After the dust settled, he looked up at the sky. He knew that she had gone to the sky. He knew that she would not escape. So no matter how high she jumped, there would be a moment when she would fall back to the ground. So he stood where he was and waited calmly. He looked up at the sky and waited. Everyone in the field followed his gaze to the sky. The morning light shone from the east sea. The snow clouds were so white and the occasionally exposed sky was so blue. Other than that, nothing else could be seen. No one was there. After a moment, a small black spot finally appeared in the sky. It was a figure. Suddenly there was a sharp whistling sound in the sky. The sound traveled to the ground and shattered the glazed tiles in the palace of the Kingdom of Song. It silenced the ancient bell in the Taoist temple and startled countless sleeping birds in the forest. Many people heard the whistle and squatted down with their hands covering their ears in pain. The whistle was the sound of friction. It was the sound of something rubbing against the air at a high speed. That thing must be extremely hard. Otherwise, it would have been broken under such a terrible speed. It was hard to imagine that it was a human body. The black spot expanded rapidly. It was a figure. Tang Xiaotang's figure. Just like what her brother had done. Just like what her teacher had done. She jumped down from the sky. She raised the iron cudgel and smashed it at Long Qing's head with an unimaginable force. The force came from the distance between the sky and the earth. No one could ignore this distance, and no one should be able to ignore this force. When the sharp whistle reached its peak, Tang Xiaotang returned to the ground. She was like a meteorite, blasting at Long Qing, who was in front of the gap in the courtyard wall. Her leather boots had already begun to burn. With sparks, more than a dozen thin lines of fire were left in the air. The next moment, the sky and the earth met. The ground was twisted and deformed. Those green bricks cracked like a spider web, turning into countless small but powerful gravel under Long Qing's feet. With a shrill tearing sound, the gravel shot everywhere. An unknown winter tree beside the courtyard wall was instantly shot into sawdust, dancing in the wind. It feels really good to work hard these 2 days. Work is actually a good medicine. I should have understood this earlier. But it's not too late. Some people say that you will naturally have the manuscript at the end of the month. I can't help laughing. Are you a new reader? You haven't read my book before, right? You don't know that I haven't asked for a monthly ticket this year, do you? You don't know anything? Are you kidding me? Here I recommend a novel written by Jiang Yishuyu. The title of the book is My Name is Yang Jiolong in the Land of Rebirth. The introduction is as follows. Yang Jiao, a modern gangster, pretended to be loyal in a gang fight, but unfortunately was mistakenly killed. With unwillingness and resentment, he traveled to the early years of the Northern Song dynasty and was adopted by Yang Jie as his second son. His name was Jiao and his courtesy name was Yenda, commonly known as Yang Jiolong. From then on, Yang Jiao began a gangster experience. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.